What's up, everybody? Javy Martinez here. I'm be your host today for a 2-day virtual summit from Glorium Technologies. Like I've mentioned, my name is Javy Martinez. I host startup events across the country. I've been hosting events for Glorium Technologies for the past year. Very excited to be bringing our first one of the year, boosting new technology with SaaS products. So I want to introduce our first speaker of the morning. So I am here in Texas. It is 7:57 in the morning, getting ready to have a great day with everyone. So I want to introduce Andrei, who is the co-founder of Glorium Technologies. He will be speaking first today. Andrei, how's it going?
Going good. Thank you, Javi, for the introduction. So everything is fine. So I'm really looking forward.
Yeah, I mean, we have a heck of an event the next 2 days. A lot of great speakers. So I'm looking forward. This is probably one of my favorite topics we've had so far in the last year. So starting off with the big bang.
Oh yeah. All right. So can I begin?
Let's do it. Floor is yours.
All right. Fine. Thank you. Thanks, Javi. So all right. So welcome everyone once again. I'm happy to open our summit, Boosting SaaS products with new technologies. It's been some time in the making, and it's finally here. And just in general, so we have already gotten a good record, track of records on going on live with virtual summits. I believe it's our 7th virtual summit already, or maybe 8th, and we planning to continue doing it and continue providing the information that we see that the startup founders and tech leaders seek. And basically, we're just trying to do anything to help you guys with providing whatever information can be helpful for you. So I am a CEO, as Javi said, introduced me. I'm a CEO of Glorium Technologies, and Glorium Technologies provides software development services, and we help startup innovators to develop their digital products. And so why we organize this summit? To basically go into a little bit more of details and dive deeper. So not only Glorium helps to develop digital products, but we also help with the product management and compliance certification, with the business consulting, and also a little bit with investment and with guidance for the startups to bring them to the next level. And naturally, we hold quite many conversations with founders and product owners in this area, with tech leaders. And many of them are always on the lookout what else can help them to get an additional competitive edge. And they're naturally looking toward all of the newest and latest tech. And so we do not possess all of the information, of course. So we're speaking with them. They ask us the questions. We try to provide as much as possible. And but I always like to seek other opinions. And so this is how, together with the marketing team, we decided to bring this event live and to bring the additional answers to all of those questions about how this latest tech can give a competitive edge to the digital products. So that's how the idea of this summit was born. Now you can say that there are many other conferences on this topic, talking about all those new technologies, and you would be absolutely right. I actually enjoy, of course, listening and visiting all of those events and seeing what's happening lately in the world. But first, I have to say that we focus, and we ask our speakers to focus strictly on SaaS startups. This is pretty important. We have a pretty specific audience in mind. And second, the purpose of the summit is, while everyone else actually talks about the latest technologies, about new technologies, and dives deep into them, how and what they can do, all of this, information all around them, we try to focus on a little bit of a different thing. We try to focus on the practical applications of all of those new technologies. So we want to provide kind of ideas and overview of all of this new tech for startup founders, for tech leaders, for the product owners, to help them generate new ideas on how this new tech can be used for their products. So we're all about the practical application and how exactly to apply this new tech, because there is a big fuss about all of this new tech. People are talking about it, discussing, but many of those discussions are theoretical. We want to funnel them into the practical area. Okay, so, and in order to do this, we have asked our speakers, the people with actual, real practical experience on day-to-day basis, to deliver their view, share their opinion and experience and knowledge straight from the trenches. And we're hoping to get a real actionable advice from those who have already been there and done that. So to move further, so these new technologies such as big data, data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning are becoming actually increasingly important for businesses of all sizes. These technologies can be used to gain a competitive edge in the SaaS market. And for example, by using big data and data science, SaaS companies can gain valuable insights into customer behavior, which can be used to optimize the user experience and improve customer retention. Artificial intelligence and machine learning can be used to automate repetitive tasks, such as customer support, freeing up employees to focus on more important tasks. But it's not just about the technology, it's also about the data. As the amount of data being generated continues to grow to an unprecedented rate, it's becoming increasingly important for companies to have the right tools and infrastructure in place to effectively manage and analyze it. That's why we have invited experts in big data and data science to share their insights and best practices on how to effectively leverage these technologies. As for artificial intelligence and machine learning, these are also becoming increasingly important for SaaS companies, from chatbots and virtual assistants to predictive analytics and fraud detection. These technologies can be used to improve customer experience and drive revenue growth. And if we talk about AI, artificial intelligence specifically has made a number of statements recently, and it's slowly becoming a norm in our day-to-day life. As an example, I don't know, you all heard about it, ChatGPT just recently made quite big waves. And so we all communicate with digital assistants from Google, Amazon, Apple. AI is processing and sorting our photo albums and suggest songs we listen or videos we watch. And there are, of course, tons of other more specialized examples in video processing, in language processing, in biotech and biochemistry, etc. We can talk long about it. So now that we have kind of more or less established the importance of it, I also, during this opening speech, I want to reference a little bit, towards the startups, towards the funding of those startups, because it shows and creates an understanding on the picture on where are we with the development of AI-related technologies with AR, VR, big data, and all of this stuff. So it actually normally and usually, especially, I would say, in new technologies, the funding shows the level of attention and the level of urgency and how to say, and applicability potential of those new technologies, right? So, and we know that in general, recently, we see that there is a gloomy picture that we observe about the startups and about the funding. So we all know how the funding, dove, absolutely deeply and tremendously last year. And we're all talking about the tech layoffs, and so all of this is happening. So of course, taking a look at all of those numbers is very interesting. And as I saw into and looked into the Crunchbase reports, I see that AI, for example, back in 2013, it was only $3 billion invested into AI startups, but it peaked in 2021 at about 69 billions of investment. This is quite a big amount. And last year, in 2022, it was about 40 billion. So as you see, there was a drop. I would say a tremendous drop, but this drop happened to approximately the level of 2020 and even higher than 2020. So yes, there was a spike in 2021, and 2022 we came back to approximately what it was. But I should say that 40 billion is a very strong number. So AI is making a very important statement in startup world as a new technology. So the investors, venture capitalists, they are making a big bet on it. At the same time, if we take a look at AR and VR, VC funding for AR and VR, it's on the, again, according to Crunchbase, it's on a much, much lower level, representing about 4.5 billion in 2021 and 3.2 billion in 2022. So we see that, yes, also, the number has dropped from 21 to 22, but we see that the total amount is, of course, not even in comparison to the artificial intelligence. We see that, this AR and VR market is not really such a big one in terms of funding, and there are rumors and speculations going on about that it is very difficult to develop anything more, anything bigger in terms of applications of all of those technologies towards the real world examples. That's why we see not so high funding levels, but still some big ideas are still being funded, and but the investors in general are very cautious about this market. And the big data, I also looked up. The big data showed a bigger interest for investors than for AR and VR, but lower than for AI. The numbers for 2022, the total investment amount was funding amount was 11 billion, but in 2021, for 2021 it was 17 billion, and for 2022 it's 11 billion. Again, we see the drop from 17 to 11 billion, but it's still the market. It's so. I would say the interest, of course, we see clearly for artificial intelligence is much higher in terms of investment than for big data and AR and VR combined. So if you're a startup, it's probably going to be very interesting to you to learn those numbers, take a look and see what investors are buying today and what can represent a potential kind of potential opportunity for your startup as you move forward and adopt those technologies, right? So now I want to go a little bit further into the market values, because it's also very interesting. So at the same time, as we see the amount of the funding is dropping in the last year, the market predictions paint an absolutely different picture. The reported data are actually different, but they all have a positive trend in common. According to a recent market study, one of those like most reliable that I found, the global big data market is expected to reach 273 billion, but by 2026, and it's currently growing at 11% of the annual compound growth rate. And this is a huge market. 273 billion by 2026, big chunk. But if we take a look at artificial intelligence market size, then also according to the reports, it was estimated that in 2022 it was at around 120 billion, but it is expected to hit $1.6 trillion by 2030, and it's expected to grow at a rate of 38.1% from 2022 to 2030. And this is, I don't know, and all reports are more or less around of the same numbers. And this is huge. This is huge. Think about it, from 120 billion to 1.6 trillion in about 7-8 years, right? So this is a 38% annual growth rate. This is big. This is a huge statement from the artificial intelligence side. So everyone can, of course, is free to make their own conclusions from all those numbers that I threw in, from the funding and recent developments in the in new tech and the market and the total market size. But my opinion is that new tech market is very resilient. There is something new, and people and the world is always looking into the new tech, and we clearly see that it is growing. And the setback in the funding is temporary. Big guys will soon be back for their share in this big pie, and I think it's only a matter of time when we start seeing the increase in the startup funding for the new tech. Now, just couple of words. Of course, not everything is clear and beautiful for when you're adopting the new tech or developing the new tech. There are several challenges, and from my perspective, from my opinion, the way how I see it, I see that this year we're gonna face with several challenges for anyone who is adopting the new technologies. And I think number one, it's increasing capital expenditure and maintenance requirements, and this is mostly related to the challenges about the amount of data that you need to process, and it can be very overwhelming for the companies and their budgets. So as we now adopt new technologies, they all require a lot of data processing. No matter what it is, it's processing and storing and operating with big masses of data, and your infrastructure costs are going to grow, and they're only going to go up. And that's why we see all of those cloud services, they're all going up and up, and they're also growing. All right, so number two, we see I think it's going to be the security concerns regarding the data. As everyone is piling up all of those tons of those data, there are always people, always hackers looking to break into your systems and looking to steal your data and capitalize on them. So the security concerns are only going to grow, and people will have to, and you as startup founders or investors or startups will have to invest more and more into the security. And number three, I think it's the labor shortage. It's the third biggest challenge, and it continues posing a threat to new and existing product development, and especially for the new tech, because you need a specialized talent and knowledge in order to effectively implement those technologies. And regardless of all of those recent tech layoffs, but the good specialists in new technologies, they always costed a lot of money, and they were always in high demand. So this will continue being a challenge. So maybe there is something more, but I think those three are going to be the biggest. All right, so I think I'm going to conclude my speech. It is already I'm a little bit overdue on my time, and I really hope that our wonderful speakers are going to be able to give you a little bit more detailed information about the practical applications of the new technologies, and I'm really excited to hear what they have prepared. All right, so Javi, back to you.
Thanks, Andrei. I really appreciate you and what the whole team is doing for everyone. I mean, these events are always great with amazing speakers packed lined up, awesome content, especially today with how fast the world is moving with technology. I think this is a spot on topic to start the event or, the year with this type of event. So especially with all the buzz going around with ChatGPT, I mean, I'm definitely a victim of it, if you want to call it that. But yeah,
I think many people have already tried it.
Yeah, I mean, if you lean in on it to leverage it, I think it's a very powerful tool. I think people are not. I think the struggle that I ran into, and from what I hear in my circles, is just like not really using this technology before. So it's kind of like someone that switched from like a flip phone to an iPhone, right? It's kind of the comparison that they're trying to make between ChatGPT and Google search.
Exactly. You know that Google has already turned on what they have red alert.
Yep.
Inside company because of that. So it's really making a statement. I think it's not there yet, but it's really making a statement. It's the beginning of something new.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I think it's definitely kind of like social media in a way, in my opinion. I think it's not going to change people. I think it's just going to expose people. Because I mean, if you're a good writer or editor, it should make you a better editor. It shouldn't, replace your job. It should be something that's supplemental to what you're doing, not there to replace your job, at least in my opinion.
I don't believe any of those, rumors that all this new technology is gonna make a toll on the jobs, that people are going to be laid off. No, it just the new technology is improving the overall level, so it helps us to be better in terms of the output, in terms of what we produce, the quality of it. This is how the whole our civilization evolves. It just from the moment that we have invented the wheel or the axe, it just doesn't mean that so many people started falling victims to the hunger because they lost their jobs of hunting the animals with their with whatever it was, with bare hands. It helped us to be better. The same thing is here. So I think the jobs will evolve a little bit, will change a little bit, but it just is gonna bring the overall level of the civilization, of us, of the products, of the services.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's really interesting. Even like going on LinkedIn now, sometimes I'm seeing jobs for like ChatGPT positions already. I'm just like,
yep.
So I think it's really interesting. And again, I think businesses should be leaning in on it. I mean, just from a productivity standpoint, I remember when I first learned about it and just messing around with it. I mean, the first couple of times I got like 6 weeks ahead worth of work just because I was able to expedite the process, but I'm also a nerd, and I'm just every day I'm teaching myself new things with it and understanding it. So it's something that you got to completely kind of rewire your brain as to how you utilize it.
All right, and then in this case, sorry for interrupting. In this case, I have a confession to make. This opening speech was partly helped by ChatGPT. So
that's amazing.
The power to prepare for this speech. So of course, not much, but part of it.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, and I think that's the whole point, is to lean in on it and leverage it. Right. I mean, like we said, I mean, it's not there to replace your job. I mean, it's still not perfect. I mean, a lot of the time, you can't just use what it tells you. So I think it's just a matter of, doing your due diligence, learning, because there's so many tools out there. I mean, I feel like every time I go on Product Hunt now, everything's an AI tool.
Not ever. Well, this is one of the things that I think this summit is going to help the startups. A lot of people declare that they use new technologies, and it became, from what I see and from what I know, everyone rushes to declare that we use AI, we use machine learning, we introduce, I don't know, big data, some smart data processing, whatever it is. But majority of startups, they're just rushing there to just put the label on their product.
Yeah.
Nothing more. The real application still is a big challenge for many of the startups. So, and this is one of the biggest reasons why we decided to create this summit, to kind of take a deeper look and see how exactly you can apply it, so that you don't just put a label, but you really use this new technology.
Yeah, because if you really look under the hood, not trying to call anyone out, but a lot of companies say they're AI or machine learning, but in reality, they're just like tech enabled, right? I mean, like they're not really an AI company, they're an AI enabled company. So there's a big difference between the two. But I understand maybe sometimes why they say that, when fundraising.
Well, it's marketing. It's a marketing move as well,
100%.
So they put the label just for the marketing purposes, and but it means that inside they struggle a lot with how to properly expand the application of those new technologies to really make the product better, and not just to put a label on it.
Yeah. I recently hosted and I'll end my part of here so we can introduce our next speaker. I was recently hosting a panel event, and it was a pitch competition, and one of the founders was talking about how they're an AI company. So then the investors obviously kind of went in on it and started grilling him with questions that he couldn't even answer. And, obviously, he got caught up in the whole ChatGPT scandal, you can call it. And, if you're going to say you're an AI company, machine, at least understand like what it does and how it's helping move your company forward, versus just saying, we're an AI driven company. It's like, okay, well, that can mean a lot of different things. So, just word of advice, especially as fundraising is beginning to get a little bit more tightened, especially talking to investors, just, make sure that you're prepared for these types of questions if you're going to go into the Wild West of the AI ChatGPT world.
Yep. All
awesome.
Right. So,
well, are we ready for our next speaker? I believe. Let's see if the moderator can bring him in. I will introduce him. We have Anurag. How's it going today?
Hello. Very good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I'm really excited about your conversation for leveraging data as a catalyst for innovation. I'd like to let the speakers kind of introduce themselves. They do a better job than I do, just because they know themselves a little bit better. But the floor is yours. I will give you the mic. You have 40 minutes. I will come in at around 5 to 10 minutes left. And if you want to leave the last 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A, that'd be great.
Okay, no, perfect. So a little bit about myself, but before I go, are you able to see my slides here? I am sharing them.
Yes, I can see them.
Okay, perfect. So a little bit about myself. My name is Anurag Sinha, and I come from a core sort of database engineering background. I have multiple degrees on the subject. I'm also a published author. Did academic research for sort of traditional companies like Qualcomm, AT&T back in the day, about 20 years ago. Following that, it's just really 18 plus years of end-to-end data engineering, facilitating or monetizing all of this enormous volume of data, which every organization tends to be sitting on, and then converting them into sort of actionable sort of use cases. Up until recently, I also ran sort of the data practice for Rogers up until 21. Following that, went into sort of raising a handful of startups, one which got acquired at private equity, the second which launched earlier this year. And my role here at KPI is I'm sort of accountable for sort of the end-to-end data and analytics offerings as it pertains to the end-to-end nature of data supply chain, but also KPI being a sort of product development consulting company also builds specializations in varieties of verticals across the industry, be it supply chain, be it manufacturing, mining, retail, pharma, telco. So that's sort of what I do. The topic of my conversation today is going to be more about how do you essentially leverage data strategy or a clear, cohesive data strategy as a catalyst for innovation. So primarily, we're going to be talking about these three areas. So we're going to tackle this sort of big bucket sort of word item called innovation. We're going to try to unravel, demystify what that means specifically as it pertains to transformation. We're going to try and figure out how that links to a data strategy and what does a great, winning, fully executable data strategy have. And then in the end, it's about the use cases, right? What are these end results or outcomes we seek to produce for ourselves or our organization? And how do the other two areas, how does innovation and data strategy sort of help us in achieving that? But before I get into the content, very quickly, a little bit about KPI. So like I said earlier, we've been around for a while and have affected a very large diversity of industries. And this is important because, you know, repeatable patterns as it pertains to data requires sort of application across a wide diversity of use cases before they can be called standardized or reusable. But important to note that our focus hasn't always been sort of end-to-end product development, technology, solution engineering, but sometimes it also has to do with process improvement or how to do simple things better, faster, you know, cheaper, for example. So again, very versatile in our reach and have affected quite a lot of different varieties of challenges and problems, and over time sort of developed a practice. But let's get to the sort of topic at hand. So we spoke about innovation. The word, of course, you know, spoken in a context for data triggers some, you know, sort of key responses, right? So what is it? Why should we care? You know, what are these deterrents or challenges, and how should we go about it? But let's sort of start with the basics. So what does it truly mean? So I mean, there's a word definition, right? Webster definition here, and a whole bunch of synonyms in terms of how we want to accomplish it. But if you think innovation is just truly about creativity or churning out great ideas, for the rest of this session, I'd encourage you to think a little bit bigger. You know, what about innovation's impact at scale? You know, what should it drive? We clearly know that it should drive growth, but sustainable, what does sustainable, repeatable, substantial sort of growth, what does that mean? But in the end, think of innovation in a business context, of course, think of innovation as an ability to sort of conceive, develop, deliver, and scale, you know, something. And this something could be process, it could be a process, it could be a product, or it could be a service, or it could be a completely new business model for customers. So, right, so innovation is taking something and doing perhaps something better with it, which produces a tangible, measurable sort of outcome. Now, what does it mean then in terms of data and broader nature of business transformation? So we know a couple of things already. So we know it's quite clear that you know, innovation represents a broad umbrella of use cases, right? Quite a few of them should resonate to perhaps a handful of innovation programs you're driving yourself, or projects which you have begun to start looking deeper into as potentials to take your business to the next level. So it is an umbrella of, let's say, initiatives or high-level vision sort of items which we want to achieve. We also know that it is crucial to sort of, or essential to have this vision, to have an innovation strategy which is long-term and continuous form, because we know it can generate sort of value, right? Most of it is predictable, you know, cyclic value, because we are able to predict with certain accuracy, but it also has the ability to generate, you know, non-cyclical benefits, such as increasing, you know, creating new revenue streams, which you didn't quite have, and having a sort of foresight into producing some of these vision items can help you do that. There's also these objectives I spoke about, right? So these objectives themselves tend to be programs on themselves, right? So if you look at increasing revenue, this can span across a wide variety of topics, right? It can span across marketing optimization, upsell, cross-sell, looking at how to do better, more stable, more predictable, highly accurate forecasting, and for it to sort of drive so the other initiatives. And I'll take another one here. So reduce sort of costs and optimize headcount. So that's again a very deep sort of topic where you could look deeper into net utilization and performance and find synergies and anomalies there and help that and have it improve your bottom line as it pertains to operational costs. There's also process-oriented things like how do you build better production lines? How do you optimize sort of specific processes which have existed with legacy infrastructure, and how do you modernize them for the new world? So it tends to be rather broad. And the two key takeaways is it is long form. It is perceived very long form. And then it is also perceived quite continuous, meaning there's got to be iterative benefits we must see for innovation long term, and then it spans across a variety of use cases. But in recent times, something's changed, right? So in times of sort of this deep uncertainty or disruption, one of the key statistics have essentially reversed, and that has to deal with value generation potential, specifically as it pertains to innovation. So what does that mean? So what it means is that companies now have to carefully balance these short-term innovation projects which we have, whether it's automation or cost reduction or perhaps building a new model to do something. And they have to now balance that with investments in big breakthrough innovations. And in the past, that had been considered sort of perhaps higher risk than looking at innovation as small spurts of capability or feature addition. But in recent times, it's becoming clear that innovation must also target some breakthrough sort of use cases which can help open new avenues for businesses in times of deep uncertainty. So and breakthroughs don't necessarily have to be Nobel Prize worthy in this construct, but even smart renovations to design and processes can produce savings that help fund much longer term investments in innovations for creating profitable growth. So I have a few case studies here, some which we were directly involved in, which I'll talk to very quickly. But the first case study here is about this packaging goods company. And again, post sort of COVID, and this is a post-COVID effect, right? During COVID, things tend to shut down, but there's obviously a post-COVID effect where the margin targets simply aren't matching up for packaging goods. And remember, we just came out of this whole pandemic situation, so there isn't necessarily a stash of capital to invest in new offerings or are making sort of big investments. Now, one of the things this company did was essentially to use their existing tech to look at some package optimization and formula rationalization through AI. And what this AI essentially concluded was if they were to shift to sustainable packaging, and this is reinforcement learning, but if you had to shift to sustainable packaging, which can be sourced completely locally, you are essentially going to reduce about 50 to 60% of your production timeline. In reality, the actual reduction was much larger. But this is an example of how you can apply AI to an adversity and expect some form of initiatives or solutions which you can implement. Of course, that requires some careful engineering and a very clear, concise strategy, which we'll talk about. But another example is there's this farming machinery and fertilizer manufacturing company. And obviously, they have huge supply chain issues because a lot of fertilizer manufacture requires, certain minerals as well as chemicals to be imported before they can be produced. And obviously, everything has a shelf life. And of course, they're in dire straits, right? Because supply chain is affected globally. and there isn't necessarily a solution outside of, okay, let's just wait for things to get better. So in this time, they had initially invested in building an ML Studio framework to essentially look at varieties of trends as it pertains to fertilizer use. They repivoted to doing sentiment analysis primarily to identify what are their customers feeling, essentially. And what they realized was customers have more use for persistent supply at that point in time than an ecosystem which can help them manage their current state, which is their machinery, scheduling of running said machinery, and any kind of self-serve portal which can be used to sort of manage all of this on an ongoing basis. So immediately they launched something which is very approachable. It's a web-based portal, and they ran through sort of training programs. And this created an enormous amount of engagement, not just for this company, but also for broader self-serve off machinery and yield-based technologies for farming. But also it created this new avenue, this ESG-centric avenue of products and services for this company. And lastly, this is a fun one because it's about beer. But one of the beer companies, this is actually quite recent. It's a South European beer company. And again, post-COVID, with the high energy prices, had essentially forced the ammonia production to stall. So if you don't know about ammonia, it's one of the crucial ingredients in creating sort of carbonation for beers, right? And if you tell a beer company, hey, you're not going to have access to predictable ammonia supply to sort of essentially do this, they essentially risk bankruptcy at this point because it's quite foundational and no one likes flat beers. So one of the things which we'd recommended early on and something this company had adopted was an OR solution to do schedule optimization, right? How do you do better production schedule optimization? And how can that sort of help you secure for the future? So one of the things this sort of OR process sort of revealed was there are alternative means of creating carbonation, some of which can be achieved locally and are not based off of ammonia. So there's this breakthrough research which they conducted about 11, 12 months ago, and essentially launched an alternative process to creating beer foam, right? It's based out of nitrogen, which is quite easily available. Remember case study one, right? Fertilizer companies have a byproduct of nitrogen, which they're now selling locally as opposed to exporting. And then this creates this ecosystem of value and goods, right? So these are sort of the case studies, but just to recap, a couple of things we have established is innovation is an umbrella, right? It's an umbrella of use cases which generally get executed through transformation-centric programs. And there's a data strategy piece, which is quite crucial to that. We've also established that post-COVID innovation or how to do it has been affected, right? It's not all about short-term small innovations, but balancing that with longer-term breakthrough innovations, which is going to sort of ensure sustainability, survivability in the future. So all good so far, but there's clear incumbent challenges to this, right? Anything which is truly innovative or has substantial tangible value tend to generally have all of these kind of challenges. But if you look at sort of this slide, I really see this as one primary challenge. And that challenge is that there isn't much clarity in terms of what is this path which we must take for the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months, which gets us to a point of innovation in a more predictable, repetitive way, right? So the top three areas: lack of clear data strategy, lack of talent, uncertainty of return. Quite a lot of these are, strategic outcomes, like things we would generally expect a strategy to sort of address. A clear adhesive strategy, like something which is sticky and can continue to sort of churn out returns in the longer term. So primary challenge is there isn't this underlying data strategy, right, which says we got to invest in ABC technologies, and to then operate and sustain said technologies, we got to invest in XYZ skill sets and talent, and then that is going match A and X, and you get predictable sort of return which you can now measure. So it's sort of all related to this cohesive underlying fabric, which clearly sort of articulates why we are doing this, specifically what are the dependencies and prerequisites which are going to sort of deliver against this, and then what does the cadence chronology look like, right? That's number one, clear, concise data strategy with all sort of directional guidance it can about talent as well as return on investment. There are other factors, though. They're small, medium, large, depending on who you are and what your history has been as an organization. But there's generally, if you've been at it for a while, you're going to end up with a multi-generational system, right? And that exudes its own level of constraints, right, to what your strategy can do and what it can achieve in the long term. Again, not necessarily shocking or surprising, but it is something which tends to contribute quite heavily towards what your innovation sort of roadmap looks like, right? Your architectural current state. And over time, as you begin to use more and more data, the data starts using you in some sense, right? So you end up with quite a lot of these disparate sources of information, which now have to be tied together to produce a certain outcome versus 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, for example. And then once you have tied them all together, you want to ensure that it has certain level of quality and governance sort of baked in, right? So it's a multifaceted set of incumbent challenges, right? We're not talking about use case objective-centric challenges. We're talking about incumbency-based challenges, which are going to be around, which are generally sort of observed in most organizations, right? And two things, lack of clear data strategy and incumbent sort of platform engineering, technical skill sets and processes. But let's drill down a little bit more, right? So we've established why innovation is relevant and that it has to be a little bit more versatile, and then there are challenges. But really the best, most predictable way to plot resolution of this path is through a data strategy, because by definition, it will help you drill down all the way to the core needs and objectives of the business. And its most tangible, producible, amongst other things, is an achievable plan, right? Like, what is this viable plan, which now ties all of your core objectives and business case into a set of perhaps projects, use cases, capabilities, which you can now execute against. But it has to, the right answer has to meet certain constraints, right? It has to be balanced against certain constraints. And we spoke about the kind of constraints that current times are have influenced on the strategy, but also the true nature of innovation. So for example, we have to consider evolving business models and discovering ways to differentiate, sometimes which may mean moving into adjacencies, right? Choosing the right portfolio of initiatives, because there's so much technology, solutions, capabilities out there. What is this minimum viable set of initiatives which are going to meet the most number of business objectives which we have set out in front of it? And by the way, while we're doing it, we got to ensure that there is compliance with regulatory aspects, and we continue to maintain the reputation and trust our customers have put into our product or our service, and then achieve some level of environment sustainability while doing it. So it tends to be a hairy sort of challenge, which has to account for quite a lot of different things, but quite clearly it's crucial, or sort of the glue which ties your big form sort of innovation objectives to real use cases, which you can now sort of deliver. So how do we go about it, right? How do we build the winning data strategy, right? Now, the framework which we have developed with our partners and academia generally spans across these 4 stages. So a typical strategy build out, right, will span across discovery, some level of strategy, outlining, moving into execution, and beginning to implement the governance around steps you have executed previously. The first 2 stages, 1 or 2, this tends to be very linear, right? Meaning it's one follows the other, but it's also very fast, right? For us, it's literally one workshop, which we will cover briefly in some of the subsequent slides because it's a very important piece to the framework. But subsequent stages tend to be non-linear because execution and governance will primarily follow needs of the business or needs of the customer. But let's try to break them down one by one. So in the 4 stages of building the strategy, right, this glue, which ties all your innovation objectives to real use cases you want to do, it's got to start with understanding specifically what your current state is and how does it map to your underlying data challenges, right? So there are 2 sort of blocks here you'll see on your right-hand side. At the top is what I call the blues, right? So these blues are sort of your business objectives. Now, important to note that they don't quite sound like data objectives because they're not, right? These are core business objectives which we want to establish, whether it's a product or a service, which we currently have to offer our customer. In our experience, though, having dealt with challenges of this nature, that they're always tied to underlying data challenges. And these are sort of your grays at the bottom. So at discovery stage, the goal is quite simple. It is to sort of tie them both. What are these objectives? And underlying them, what could be these challenges, whether they're technical, data, people, process? Like you'll see, the grays are not all technical. Some of them are process or culture oriented of how we tackle innovation in the company. But important at step 1 to try and understand what are these objectives and how do they in some way tie to these perhaps underlying challenges which you may have, right? Once you have done that, this is a great sort of segue or opportunity to now start creating a data strategy outline, right? Now, at this point in time, it is super important, right, to not jump in and try to build it all, right? I think that's a typical sort of pitfall. But the most accelerated approach, or the approach which has the most returns, is to look at a minimum viable set of data capabilities you would seek in the long term, right? So try to establish within your outline, which is directly influenced by the 2 teals on the side. So remember, these are your constraints you identified in step 1, right? You identified what your objectives are going to be, your business strategy, and we've identified what data challenges, meaning existing infrastructure, people, process challenges you're going to have. And these are your constraints, right? And remember, this is a strategic activity, so which requires constraints to sort of accurately predict what it can or cannot do, right? So we have established constraints, and we're looking at strategy. All we're trying to establish here is create an outline, a minimum viable outline of topics we will need to address in the future. Again, you're also not trying to complete every section of this document, yet you're trying to outline what sections does the document have, and then within it, what are these sections which you need right now to sort of meet your key strategic objectives, and while being respective of whatever infrastructure sort of choices you've made currently in the future. Now, in our experience, generally your minimum goal, it stems from a source-centric strategy. You got to have a data source strategy, which talks about how ingestion works and how that's going to be managed in the long term. Got to have an integration, storage, and ops strategy, which talks about how this data now traverses to the ecosystem while maintaining quality, lineage, and predictability. And then how does it get stored and sort of operated? And then lastly, you're going to have some level of basic strategy around how does data now get converted into consumable information, and then has some sort of a self-serve framework where this information can then get consumed and then created into further outcomes or business as usual sort of reporting, what have you. But essentially, you're trying to draw an outline. Once you have drawn this outline, this is, in our recommendation, a perfect opportunity to start executing, right? Don't spend 6 months sort of planning, but trying to understand objectives and constraints first, build an outline which can anchor, and then start some form of execution which can produce returns. So there's two things on this slide here. So number one, on the top, this you may recall from a visual from a couple of slides ago, but essentially the first cycle of execution is almost always a planning sprint, right? Because this is where you're trying to establish why you're doing this. What's the business case? How you're going to achieve it? Like, what is the architecture of the solution, which is sort of future-proof and can continue to sort of execute going forward? And then once you have done all of this, how are you going to govern, operate this ecosystem? So these are table stakes, right? You want to define at least the table stakes up front in a planning sprint, and then you go into sort of iterative execution mode, right? And which differs quite widely from company to company because everyone has their own sort of delivery paradigm on how they want to execute. But the second piece here is what's important is to not come into this completely blind, is to have a repeatable framework for executing use cases, right? And with over time, if you've done quite a lot of this, as we have, you end up developing a repeatable pattern, right? And this is sort of a teaser, if I may, of what this repeatable pattern looks like. So at the bottom, you'll see this use case journey map, which has 14 steps. The point here is it's a framework, right? Now, your particular use case may require 2 steps, and that's perfectly fine. But the point I'm trying to make is you must not go blind into this. You've got to have a framework which has predictable input and output, and it has some sort of calculated ways on how it's going to measure performance of this particular pipeline or execution of this use case, right? So it's important to have that framework and then for it to be versatile to execute against any use case. But once you have done certain level of execution, and remember on step 2, when we were building this outline, we outlined what our minimum level of governance looks like, right? Now that you have executed a handful of cycles and when the planning sprints are done, this is a great opportunity to now start executing against the key data governance sort of aspects you have established early on. And this, again, remember, minimum viable. So this could be, hey, I want a little bit of an automated data quality framework, which ensures that there's no nulls in the data, and then if there's missing values that they've been imputed and certain level of mean and standard deviation have been normalized. And I want to ensure that there's access policies sort of managing who's accessing what and at what point in time, and then certain level of standards in terms of what you can do with this data, and that's perfectly fine. But what's important is to start early. Start when you've had certain capabilities which can now be governed, and then start executing or building this broad framework, which will 100% be a journey and not an event. And then get on this journey of establishing data governance principles against capabilities which are now tied to a strategy. But remember, you've probably picked up on this trend through the previous couple of slides, but it's all about what this minimum viable sort of X looks like for you, MVX. The base trend here, obviously, is minimum viability. And it's based on the premise that smart orchestration is key of perhaps existing technologies while towing this line of minimum viability across all areas we have jointly identified through the strategic exercise, right? So in strategy, you've identified a handful of areas which you're going to prioritize first, right? We spoke about ingest and source and operations. Well, that means there's got to be a minimum line around foundational work you want to do, around minimum viable architecture it needs, minimum viable sort of capabilities, which is going to support this architecture, and perhaps a minimum viable product definition around what kind of products or services this platform capabilities may offer. But that's sort of the goal here, is to try and identify what this unique minimum viable line essentially looks for you. And if you have gone through this process with us, right? Steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and establish certain level of execution and governance, you end up with what we have delivered over and over again over the past 3 years or so, is essentially you end up with this modern and trusted data and analytics platform. Right? So remember, it's governed because that was baked in, and it can do sort of a wide variety of use cases. So this slide is a little bit of an eye chart. I apologize, it's kind of hard to sort of read into the text, but I'll summarize, right? So there's 2 key takeaways here. Every box is modular. So meaning, if you see the stream box and you don't necessarily have use for real-time data, take it out. I think that's the value of a reference architecture, for it to be modular in terms of capabilities, which can now fit the specific nature of your constraints. Remember, we defined that in step 1. So number 1, modularity, right? It must have all patterns, but they must be structured in a modular fashion so it can be sort of turnkeyed into your specific ecosystem. Number 2, it's unopinionated. There aren't any logos on this. And that is sort of important if you're trying to build a reference architecture. Because remember, the goal here is problem solving. It's not necessarily, here's a great technology which you can currently utilize, and let's figure out how to now utilize it, right? It's sort of the other way around. We have figured out what our constraints are, what our objectives are, and we'll build a minimum viable strategy outline. And now we're going to figure out from an execution practical standpoint, what are these capabilities it's going to need? And then judging by your current infrastructure choices, it may have an organic next step, like in terms of what we should do from a technology standpoint. But to be frank, there's no reinvention of wheel happening here, right? We're not trying to rebuild it all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We believe we have strategic and purposeful partnerships across what I describe as sort of all layers of the data supply chain, all the way from providers of systems of record, platforms, infrastructure as a service, to this unified data and analytics core, which tends to fit somewhere in the middle, all the way to sort of your systems of engagement where predominantly consumption, further analytics, and insight sharing sort of happens. But what's key here is, not just to have these really tight partnerships, but also now to expose the value of these to our customers or our clients, right? And how do we do that? There's tons of alliances and joint ventures which we help structure. We also test and scale out new business models and offerings through, controlled means or more broad form means. And these kind of things tend to take a very long time to organically develop, but they tend to be very important for innovation. And this is sort of the value we add. A little bit about how this converts into offerings, right? So again, it's a little bit of an eye chart, and I know I'm coming up on time, so I'll sort of go through this fast. But essentially, the key here is to establish repeatable patterns across all aspects of the data supply chain. So if you read through sort of the titles of 1 to 9, it should foundationally seem like a journey to you, right? So you start with strategy and build certain architectural and governance aspects and platforms, start ingesting and processing and organizing your data, and then it can become measurable and produce further outcomes such as AI. But I brought an example here to sort of help drive this point home. But what does a pattern mean to us? So number 1, a pattern has to meet a clear problem statement, right? So this is an example pattern. It's part of, I think, section 9 here of AI solutions. But basically, it's the problem statement here is, in our experience developing or deploying AI solutions, 2 observations become quite clear. So number 1, it's all about the accuracy, right? So manual measures will get you far, right? Don't get me wrong. But the big allure here is there practically achievable, higher real-world verified accuracy, which I can develop and maintain for your specific function. And when I say accuracy, it could be anything. It could be accuracy of your supply chain or your production line. It could be accuracy of forecasts, accuracy of revenue. It could be varieties of different things. But accuracy is paramount. It's what drives predominant allure as it pertains to specific AI modeling in this space. Observation number 2 is that if accuracy is key, more accuracy will drive higher sophistication of your models, right? It makes logical sense. If you want your models to be highly accurate, you gotta build in more sophistication into it. Well, if you build more sophistication, it's gonna need higher cost to train, right? That's how sophistication tends to get built, right? It's higher training cost, and you add incremental features, you perhaps expose it to other knowledge bases it was not, which is again training cost. But yeah, more accuracy requires more sophistication, which leads to higher training cost. Let's say you do all of that. Well, what you end up with is model which is now extremely, extremely accurate, but by definition then is higher sensitive to errors. Meaning if it's very highly accurate, even 0.1% error in your data source may create wide changes, wide variations in predictions it is trying to make. So more sophistication will also make it more prone to errors in some sense, which means higher sort of management cost again, right? So you got to build automated quality frameworks to ensure that never happens and that there's lineage. You know, if you're seeing some prediction in the front end, there's got to be explainability of where did this come from and what's driving this particular value versus not. But remember, if you're spending so much cost, it's going to drive more attention, right? And generally, almost always higher demands of accuracy. So I hope you can sense this circle. So it's a circle where accuracy will drive sophistication higher and hence operational cost higher, which will drive demands for accuracy even higher. And then it continues to grow, right? So that's the problem statement here, that there is this cycle which companies don't feel they need to get stuck in to essentially assess viability of how can AI essentially help them. So what we did was we developed this framework, and you'll see some logos on this slide because this is a practically launched framework in production. But again, quite a lot of these are open source technologies, meaning completely transferable or replaceable with other more comparable technologies. So, but essentially, we developed this framework where you can do this, where you can adopt AI at minimal cost, and within weeks, at the end of every iteration, the solution itself will prove its worth to warrant future investments, right? So time to market is dramatically reduced, but more important, the risk of upfront investment in terms of, it could be your people's time or it could be dollars, is negligible in comparison, right? So again, this is how our patterns essentially play out, right? So essentially 3 things. What is the problem it's trying to solve? And remember, it's not a technology solution, right? It's a problem solution. What is the problem it's trying to solve in contrast to other problems? Does it require some level of specialized tools? So we check that. It quite does not. It does not require that. And number 3, what's sort of the exit strategy here? So if in step 1 of impact assessment, it's not feasible. At this point, you haven't spent an enormous amount of time building this foundational ecosystem for AI, which is foundationally not feasible or requires quite a lot of amount of time to get fine-tuned. Let's say it is feasible, then you can go into an automated quality and certification and supply chain, which can sort of improve the sophistication of your model. Let's say it continues to prove value. At that point, you get into ensembling and real-world evaluation and fine-tuning your model. So again, this is a well-structured iterative framework, which lets AI prove its worth sort of every step of the way. I'll touch on this very quickly, but this is another sort of pattern. This is based on the principle that most insights of the future are going to be, foundationally ephemeral in nature, right? They'll be useful for a short amount of time, and then after that, their value is going to diminish. Hence, the engineering paradigm must then account for this principle, sort of in in modeling the data, creating insights, and then cleaning up so it doesn't continue to create sort of incremental operational costs without necessarily any value, right? So we developed this ecosystem, which essentially can work against any data lake or warehouse and creates an ephemeral architecture to do sort of data analytics and AI. And as you could tell, you could build monitoring solutions here. You could do traditional BI reporting. You could do high value AI model training, or even build microservices because it's all API based. So again, the point of patterns is to do essentially this, is to identify specific problems which it can solve and create an approachable path with strategy in achieving them. So I alluded to workshops earlier, but it's important, and this is sort of the last part of the strategy story. But a word on effective facilitation, right, of workshops. So workshops are one of those tools which aren't necessarily new, right? But they constantly get reinvented, right? So foundationally to us, they have singular goals, right? And that is of stakeholder alignment. Well, towards what? Well, towards creating what we described earlier, an executable path of outcomes which are essentially viable to you. Now, the outcomes themselves could be very, very specific, meaning it could be use cases you want to achieve, or they could be, foundational, like your minimum viable data strategy for the next 3 years. And we've done our deep research, some of it which is cited here. Actually, this one is a Cambridge study, which was done on, sort of self-facilitating templates for data strategy and innovation. And we essentially built frameworks and modules sort of around it, which, through a period of a day, sort of go from 0 to 100 in plotting a clear strategy outline for you, which is very execution top of mind. And essentially, you could start executing on day 2. We also fully utilize the tooling available to us in current times. So we currently utilize a Miro-based framework for the workshop. But again, this was not a paid message from the creators of Miro. I think the core goal here is probably more important, is to get stakeholder alignment, and there are varieties of ways to achieve it. The workshop itself we offer for free, but the alignment itself, which it yields between yourself and your stakeholders, is sort of what's priceless. Okay, so look, so much for the strategic workshop, but let's do a quick recap here. So we spoke about what innovation is, its true nature, and we acknowledge that innovation has always been part, right, of this long-term strategy. And in recent times, there's been a disruption, right? So there's a disruption which forces businesses to now balance this sort of short form iterative but long-term continuous innovation with potential breakthrough bets in innovation, which can drive their businesses further, open up new revenue streams, new and innovative product models for them. And then we spoke about, okay, that's all great, but how is that achieved tactically or practically? And then we spoke about this framework, which can now take in all of these objectives you have and take them through a predictable, tried and tested method to produce essentially a viable path, right? Which we call data strategy, but it's essentially a viable path of outcomes which stem from your specific objectives and constraints, right? So the last piece is about use cases, right? So once you've done all of this, the anchor point, or what drives sort of key value for end consumers, got to be these outcomes. Now, in our experience, there's generally 3 areas or departments or mentalities, what have you, which have an interest in championing sort of innovation, right? So, and I describe it very simply as there's the top line folks, there's the bottom line folks, and then there's sort of innovation mandated teams, teams who have been structured specifically for the task of innovating in certain areas. Now, the top line is more about, upsell, increasing revenue, cross-sell, marketing campaigns and automation and your next best offers and your campaign intelligence and scoring. So it's really about sort of improving your top line through varieties of measures, means, and mechanisms. And there's some clear use cases there, right, which you could modularize, package, and have a clear start and end date on, right, and execute on an ongoing basis. The bottom line, which is sort of the next section, this tends to be more about, how do I do this better? How do I unify all of these different identities which are across my ecosystem and hopefully create a method for this information or this unified identity to now cross-pollinate insights, which perhaps were developed in one area to other areas, right? So, and that's extremely, extremely likely to happen in the future. And there is a concerted effort and a handful of programs. Specifically, they stem from data governance, master data management, or customer data platform-centric areas. But they're essentially a concerted effort to try and tap into this particular opportunity, right? So it's to create insight once and reuse intelligence in multiple sort of areas. And lastly, as I spoke to earlier, there's innovation mandated teams, right, who specifically have been structured and have the task of producing blood from stone. There's a broader set of facilitation and turnkey use cases here, like sales forecasting, pricing optimization, or expanding your service catalogs. But that's essentially the primary goal, is how do you innovate against all aspects of the business, whether it's top line, bottom line, and how do you create sort of reusable sort of value going forward? And I'll brush up on some of these briefly. So I'll talk about the CPG example. So again, the challenge was this CPG company, they wanted to use consumer data, right, to make intelligence decisions about product and marketing. This is sort of the need of the hour. However, the incumbent architecture was lagging far behind. And predominantly, the orchestration was not there, meaning there wasn't clear ownership of data going from A to B, and that created quite a lot of sort of grief in terms of the believability of the data sets, but also insights you could essentially produce. They also lacked any form of real-time capabilities, and this is quite crucial if you want to develop real-time campaigns, which are very, very effective in our times. But also kind of hard to orchestrate if you don't have the foundational sort of platform in place. The solution, obviously, was to solve the problems of today with an eye on problems of the future, right? So obviously, there is a straightforward way to solve the solution in the imminent term. However, what's going to be crucial is to develop something scalable, something which is fault tolerant, is to understand the specific behavior of the customer and that it is going to continue to be high velocity, like in the future. And real-time dashboards may very quickly become self-service analytical tools, which the internal teams and very smart people sitting on the edge who understand sort of the pulse of the market can now utilize to drive their businesses forward, right? And remember, none of this is part of the problem statement, but it is what is required in terms of the long-term solutioning. And lastly, establishing again, minimum viable governance to support data exchange, but also support monetization of this data so that this insight can be reused. Obviously, the results speak for themselves, but like I said earlier, I think one of the primary goals is to have end-to-end stakeholder alignment across key use cases and capabilities you want to deliver against current and future consumer trends. But also it creates this resilience. Remember, this is one of the first slides we spoke about. Why is innovation important? Well, primarily because it creates resilience and value in the long term. And some of these solutions, or whatever these solutions are, must account for resilience in times of deep uncertainty as of today. And this certainly did that. But lastly, it also had what I call gravy on the side, right? So if you have a well-governed ecosystem, it substantially reduces your time to resolve defects, right? Because you essentially have lineage to tell you what went wrong. You're not spending too much time figuring out what happened. It also gives you a way to do audits. Regular auditability is a great after effect. Also, regulatory compliance, which tends to be very, very, very crucial and also quite dynamic as it tends to change and evolve over time. A similar example is more on the retail governance side. So a major retailer wanted to sort of improve the top line. So again, this is a top line use case through data-driven insights. Primarily, this is something which I call a facilitation use case. This is where the user themselves are highly capable of meeting the outcomes, however, lack the appropriate tooling and facilitation technology available for them to create their task, right? So our solution obviously was to create sort of this Google or Amazon of data catalog where you could go in and essentially search in sort of human readable language what specific data sets are of interest to you, and depending on security clearance you have within your company associated with your Active Directory profile, you'll get access to this information, whether it's financial data or policies and procedures. All of this is now centralized into this cataloging ecosystem, which acts as a marketplace, so to say, of capabilities, entities, and data sets which we're sitting on, and very smart people across our organization can now get access to it and utilize it. Another one is in sort of this healthcare space, and I think this is the last bit of my slides. So the healthcare organization here, or the industry in general, specifically as it pertains to adoption, remember we spoke about accuracy being key. Well, it's double or triple important in the healthcare space, because the value of prediction is only as good as the trust you have in how it was sourced, whether it was sourced correctly, does it have the right checks and balances in place, and then in turn, if it's saying X% accuracy, you can very well believe and draw a certain diagnosis and prognosis from it. But the specific challenge this particular customer had was there was no, of course, there was no clear data strategy, but what that resulted into was there was varieties of data silos, which were now across different parts of the organization, feeding perhaps useful but isolated value to their own stakeholders. And there is tons of duplication of capabilities across the board. For us, this is sort of data engineering one-on-one, is to try and figure out what is the shortest path to reducing duplication and unifying data in a way where it can now be clean, validated, and integrated at source, and create lineage so that if something goes wrong, you have clear way of identifying what happened. So create a unifying data warehouse in this case, which can combine data sets from a variety of sources and then massage and clean them. And then second, once it's ready, you got to have an ecosystem which is easy, does not have a huge ramp up to essentially deliver, get it to essentially create value from it. And for that, we developed a self-service ecosystem, again, very similar to the cataloging example, where what you have access to is pre-configured into your Active Directory. And then once you log into this Power BI instance, for example, you have access to these entities which are developed and managed in the backend, but now can be used to drive your own versions of the dashboards and analytics. But then I could keep going. There's a handful of use cases. I tried to pick a good variety, but we've done similar things for, fintech, finance and risk management, risk scoring and valuation, and billing and debt collection. So a lot of these sort of use cases tend to stem from same problems, that there's quite a lot of silos, and then data is not necessarily in one place, and hence it's very hard to govern 4 places or manage quality in 5 places, right? So it tends to prevent a creative or sustainable way of finding or building these use cases, and then that's where we can help. And then marketing and sales, we spoke about quite a lot of these use cases. Supply chain, this tends to be a huge area where architecture and value is not just static or in time, but also has now evolved to a more real-time course corrective sort of behavior, which requires, what we spoke about, a clear, concise data strategy, which is not, expansive or exhaustive. It's minimum viable, but it does deliver against some of the key use cases you have. Production-based use cases, this is more on the optimization research side. And these are all active use cases we've been involved in the past year or have in the pipeline. And then HR and creative and customer service. So some of these areas too, again, benefit greatly from perhaps centralizing identity, but also from having this pipeline, which is predictable and can produce certain use cases. Lastly, I think the goal here, the big goal here through all of this, is to try and identify. We've all seen this value escalator, right? There's varieties of versions of this, and then this is obviously our version. But the concept is obviously the same. Knowledge is power in a sense that we need to establish or have a repeatable framework to establish exactly where we are, and have a constraint-based exercise to plot where is it that we want to be. And you'll be surprised that with clear alignment across the board, that there is a much more accelerated path, which is not linear, meaning if you're in 2 and you want to go to 4, you don't necessarily have to go through 3 to get there, which can be achieved through clear collaboration and execution, right? So that's sort of the key here, to help build this commercial sustainable path, which can take your innovation objectives and then convert it into real actionable use cases, which are all have some kind of an underlying fabric governing performance and value called data strategy. The last thing I want to say, and I'll stop here, is, now is the time. I think this is a great opportunity to really look deep into what have the innovation portfolio you are following today, what has that produced for you in earnest? And then depending on the answer, where can it go next? And what level of fresh insights and opportunities perhaps your current ecosystem has been sitting on, but because of the innovation portfolio, you have not been able to realize. And how do we get there? And once we have done that, we have some idea of what this innovation insight looks like. How do we now take a repeatable framework to essentially execute and evolve our business, transform our business based on all this great design which we set forward? So I'll stop here and hand back over to Javy. Thank you so much for everyone to listen in. Feel free to reach out to Javy and others if there's any sort of questions or follow-up. But thank you.
Anurag, thank you so much for that. That was, I think I took like a page and a half worth of notes. So that was awesome. I really appreciate all that insight. I wanted to ask you a few questions if you don't mind, but let's open up the floor to the audience, see what questions you have for Anurag. And my question for you is, as we move into 2023 with all this technology, what is one piece of advice you have for companies or startups or just founders in general in the direction of kind of pushing the envelope on innovation?
Right. I think the predominant trend I see here is in an appetite to do it all, right? And I think that's it's crucial to sort of avoid that anti-pattern, but it's not necessarily obvious how to avoid it, right? We have these objectives we want to reach, and sometimes there isn't necessarily a clear A to B mapping of how can 4 objectives be reached with 4 use cases. Sometimes 4 objectives become 20 use cases, and we don't necessarily know which within those 20 will move the needle most against the 4 objectives we have, right? So it's not linear. It's become this non-linear mapping exercise where we sort of understand what innovation objectives mean to us, but we lack sort of this repeatable framework which can process this huge diversity of tools, technologies, platforms which are available in the industry and come up with a path which is personal to you, right? and you've made some technology choices, incumbency choices in the past, no need to throw them all away. That's generally, again, a big anti-pattern. Most innovation strategies tend to reinvent or rebuild the existing ecosystem you have, but you don't quite need to. You just need to understand what your core objectives are and what is the shortest path which an intelligent partner can work with you to sort of plot, which is, which is not trying to sell you a particular technology or solution, but really trying to solve the problem of innovation or the challenge of innovation and how to deliver it. So that's been my big advice: is don't try to build this overarching data strategies. It's going to take you 6 months to do and likely will produce diminishing returns. Work with a smart partner who can, in a very short amount of time, get you to a data outline, which you can then prioritize and execute sort of quite immediately versus waiting 6 months. And then iteration is key, right? Continue to iterate and evolve your strategy as you go along. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I'm still waiting to see in the comments if we have any questions. I have a few comments to that. I think you hit it, the nail on the head with, I think a lot of time I play or focus a lot with early stage startups. I run an accelerator here in Dallas. And then, I've been part of founding teams for different startups. And with my experience, what I've learned is we might think we have the world's greatest innovation or technology, right? But at the end of the day, it's just like an idea. And a lot of us get stuck in that strategizing phase too much instead of trying to just execute and implement. And I think that's definitely something that needs to be turned around in getting your product out earlier, right? Wanting people to break it so you can continue to evolve the product or technology or service. Because I come from a growth marketing background. So for me, I don't like to market. I have a lot of first-time founders that I work with, early stage startups that, just want to throw an ad, right? Or want to do this, but they're not measuring what they're marketing. And that's a very inefficient way to go about, compiling data. So one thing that I try and implement with everyone is essentially create a process that you can systemize so then you can automate, right? Because then at scale, that's what, AI and machine learning can help you accelerate that process with all that. But you have to have a system and a process in place in order to make it work.
Right. And I think decisioning, you're absolutely right. And I think decisioning frameworks are quite key as our choices aren't becoming simpler. I heard yourself and Andrei were talking about ChatGPT earlier. I'm sure in the next 5 years, there's going to be a wide plethora of models and technologies, which are self-sustaining and which can help produce. And the onus will then become on the user to essentially navigate which one's the best fit for my specific set of objectives. And going back to one of the examples I gave of vertically integrating AI, there is a simpler way to do this. The question isn't what's the best solution. The question is, let's just assess viability of the idea first. And that needs to happen in a way which is solution agnostic, because the minute it becomes solution dependent, you're spending 3 months doing it, right?
And you're at the mercy of that platform too.
Exactly. And tomorrow those platforms, technologies may change, but if your organization has this decisioning framework, it can utilize that to pick new platforms and new technologies to essentially solve sort of these key business objectives which you have. So again, you're absolutely right. It's very exciting. We're going through these exciting times, but with exciting times come these sort of challenges, right? Which we'll need to sort of resolve as we go along. And I think key partnerships and frameworks are going to be quite key to that.
I agree. So I saw you mentioned earlier where people can connect with you. What platforms are you on? Are you a LinkedIn, Twitter, other social networking platforms? Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is excellent. I think please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to send them my way.
Awesome. Will do. It looks like we don't have any questions that have come in. So if you would like to, you could stick around a little bit longer, or anything else you want to leave our audience with before we move on to the next speaker.
No, excellent. I just want to applaud all the great work Javi and team have done in sort of organizing this event, and especially in sort of current times. It's very, very impressive to sort of get this out and have this right level of speakers sort of talk about some of the key topics which sort of aid small, medium, large businesses. So big applause to the team, and really glad to be here.
Yeah, I will. Can you hear me still?
Again.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, at full transparency, definitely I'm the spoiled one in here because I get to talk to cool people like yourself. Andrei and his team have done a phenomenal job. This is my 8th time hosting this for them. So, it just keeps getting better and better. So, yeah, thank you to speakers like yourself for taking time out of your day to educate our folks that are joining us from across the world, honestly. So, yeah, I really look forward to having you at a future one, hopefully, and wishing you the best of luck and lots of success in 2023.
Thank you. And likewise, all the best to you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker, he is running late, so I will be talking for a little bit. Maybe Andrei can join me and we can have a conversation. This would be a good time for everyone to go grab your coffees while we have a few minutes in between for our next speaker to come up. We are going to be moving the schedule around a little bit. Our next speaker will be Matt Schaefer, Director of Artificial Intelligence at Rios Intelligent Machine. So I really look forward to his conversation about expanding market opportunities with artificial intelligence. What y'all think so far about the first presentation? Didn't see too many questions in the comments, so let's make sure we get some questions for the speakers that would definitely engage the conversation further. And I highly encourage everyone to connect with all our speakers. It's been one of the biggest hacks in my business networking career, just being able to meet everyone and just keeping up with what they do. So I love hosting events, specifically startup events, and I learned so much. I've learned more in these last 8 events. I keep telling my wife than I did in 5 years of college with 3 degrees. So, there's a lot of great insight from people that have been there and done that. So let me see if Andrei will be joining me. For those who are here today, where are you joining from? If you want to put the city you're at, your name, your company, and a 1-sentence pitch about what you do. And I'll give you a few shout outs here while we wait for the next speaker to come up. So I just got an announcement from our mod and said we will be taking a break and we will be back in, 15 minutes for our next speaker. I'm sorry for the scheduling. The speaker had to swap around his time. I will be going off here in about a minute. But yeah, we will be taking a quick coffee break. Apologize for the sudden stop. Speakers running a little bit behind, and I will get back to y'all in about 15 minutes or so. And yeah, I just keep your computer on and maybe the volume so you can hear my voice whenever I let everyone know that we're coming back. What's up, everybody? Javy Martinez back. We are back. Let everyone kind of trickle back in as I bring in our new speaker, Matt Schaefer, Director of Artificial Intelligence. Matt, how's it going today?
All right. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to give it another minute or so, and I'll let you kind of introduce yourself, and I'll give you a quick breakdown. If you have about 40 minutes, if you want to spend 25 to 35 minutes talking and then leaving the last 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A. Hopefully everyone's a little bit more awake than our first call. So depending on what part of the world that you're in.
Yeah, no, I'm out in California, so it's still pretty early here, but
yeah. It sure is.
Got some coffee.
Well,
and I'm ready to go.
For joining us. So the mic is yours.
Yeah. So if you're ready, I can go ahead and present. Then give me just a second here to bring that up. All right, hang on just one more second. I am not seeing the proper screen. All right, I think I've got it now. All right, can you see my screen? I'm gonna assume.
Yep, I can see it now.
All right, great. All right, so yeah, my name is Matt Schaefer. I'm the Director of AI and co-founder at Rios Intelligent Machines. Put simply, Rios builds intelligent robots for smart factory automation, which involves some very difficult problems. We'll get into a few of those today. But Rios, along with many robotics and AI startups, is generally considered to be in the class of companies that are referred to as deep tech. And if I can scroll to the next slide. Right, hold on one second. That does not seem to be working on the. That's going all the way to the end. Let's see. I've lost my controls to the slides here. Let me try to reshare one more time. One moment. Sorry about this. I've never streamed on this platform before. All right, let's try that. All right, are you seeing the slides now?
Yes.
All right, and it should say deep technology. Yes, okay, I see it. All right, sorry about that. All right, so as I mentioned, Rios, along with many other robotics companies and AI startups, are generally considered to be in the class of companies called deep tech. If you go to Wikipedia and look up the definition, this is what it says here. There's a few things to point out, and the first thing I actually want to point out is the date that this was last edited. So this was edited back in 2020, and that was before the recent economic events that kind of changed the way people have been thinking about startups and investing. So part of this definition is that deep technology requires some substantial scientific or engineering challenges, and you can definitely apply that to a lot of the work that we're doing, as well as other startups in the field of artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and so forth. The other thing here that they say is that the primary risk that these startups undertake is technical risk, and while that may be true, there's also market risk in any startup. But they do say that it is significantly lower due to the clear potential value of the solution to society. And I think that's one of the things that I'd like to talk a little bit more about today, in terms of how we view machine learning startups in particular, and what it really takes to build out a business. And so, they downplay the market risk due to this clear potential value, and I think we're gonna look a little bit deeper into that. And so if you look at the investment over the last decade or so in terms of deep tech investments, as we're looking at here, the growth of deep tech has been pretty substantial. So between 2016 and 2020, you can see that the deep tech investments grew from about $15 billion in 2016 to about $62 billion in 2020. And the projections for the next few years show it growing to about 200 billion in 2025. So, again, the time at which these projections were made is a few years ago, back in 2021, when there was still a lot of optimism around the deep tech industry and really what the potential payouts were going to be. If you start to look a little bit more recently, you can see that there was an inflection point in around 2021, 2022, where the recent economic downturn marked a change in investor sentiment. And if anyone has tried to raise money in the last 6 months, you may have noticed how differently investors are thinking about what makes a good investment. And this quote here represents the more recent criteria that venture capitalists and early stage investors are using to make decisions about investments. Previously, there was a class of investors called tourist investors, which were investors with cash coming in earlier stages than they usually would. And investors are telling us that those days are gone. Investors now want to see a clear path to profitability. But the question I want to look at here is, what does a path to profitability look like for these deep tech startups? But before we do that, let's just reconsider what deep tech means. And without the optimism that the Wikipedia definition gave around overcoming market risk by virtue of technology, trying to see things through the lens of pragmatism. Here's another perspective that reframes deep tech as an approach that revolves around the business model and doesn't aim to fit technology to a hypothetical problem, but instead is implemented as a closed loop process. So in the end, these deep tech companies still face the same business challenges of any startup, but they also need to navigate the additional complexity of technological risk, albeit with the hope of a larger future payout. But this basically means we still have to look carefully at the market we are targeting and understand how a machine learning or AI strategy can fundamentally become a product. Not only how they can be productized, but how they are monetized successfully. And even today, there are a lot of hypotheses around how technologies like ChatGPT and generative AI for images and videos will make money for their creators. And the truth is that it's not as simple as developing the technology and releasing it into a market that's waiting to embrace it. So, looking at the state of industrial automation today, I want to go into a couple videos that give examples of the types of opportunities that we see on a regular basis at Rios. So in the video here, you're going to see an end-of-line pack station where people are packing objects into boxes. In this case, it looks like pretty standard beer bottles. And you'll notice that there are a number of stations that cover tasks like box opening, box assembly, box reorientation, picking and placing of objects. There's palletizing, and there's also on-the-fly quality inspection. And, as people pick up those bottles and put them in the box, they, it looks like there's a bucket that they're dropping ones that don't pass inspection into for discarding. And end-of-line pack stations like these are a common bottleneck in logistics operations, which are partially but not fully automated. It's not uncommon to see lines of people doing repetitive tasks like this that fill in the gaps in semi-automated processes. I have another example here, which is an item you might be familiar with. And this is a Twinkie factory, and you can see that both quality inspection and packing are happening in the same step. So these workers on the line are grouping the Twinkies together. They're looking at them, and they're getting rid of the ones that don't pass inspection. It's a pretty repetitive task that looks like it would be easy to automate, and it's often surprising that today there's still a lot of tasks that are done manually just like this. And there's a lot of commonality between tasks like this and the one we saw before, where objects are coming down a conveyor to a team of human workers who are picking them and putting them into boxes. So these aren't hard tasks for humans, but they can be for robots. And some of the labor challenges have been well publicized. The jobs themselves are monotonous. They're ergonomically unforgiving, and they have a notoriously high turnover rate. As this headline here shows. And the repetitive nature really does seem like a good opportunity for automation. So, as I mentioned, it can be a surprise when you see how much of our manufacturing and supply chains are still composed of manual labor, and they're staffed with these low-wage workers. And this is only part of the story, though. This is a leading economist whose name is Robert Gordon, and he's at Northwestern. And he's known for this quote, which is that industrial robots have been around since 1960, and they've been surrounded by a lot of hype. Yet when I travel, I play a game called Spot the Robot, where I count how many robots I see. That number has not changed considerably in the past decades. And this is something that we see all the time at Rios. We make a lot of on-site visits and walk around these factories, and there's opportunities for automation everywhere. So, how do we overcome the inertia of an industry that seems to be held back by technology? And one of the first things to look at here is around the way equipment is traditionally purchased as part of capital expenditures. So this model defines the sales cycle from budget allocations, approvals, and internal sign-off to installation and integration and even support models. And it has multiple consequences. So I'm going to skip over some of the details here, but a number of factors are important for understanding how we can appeal to a broader base of customers. And you that these limitations have real world impacts in terms of what capabilities a company might have to automate. And going into customer understanding a little bit, I think there's a scope of application, or there's a scope beyond just the applications where we want to understand what the customer motivations are. And I think in startup terminology, this section might have been called product market fit, but I think market fit really only comes from deeply understanding the target customer and being able to see things from their point of view. And without actually talking to customers and building the relationships with them, it's really difficult to understand what features or incentives will nudge them in the direction of engaging with your technology. So in our case, the target customers in our box packing examples both came from the food and beverage industry. But there are many places where packing to boxes is a key process. So this slide has a few examples of potential target customer categories, along with an example of their core business objectives. And the details aren't important here, but I'm using this slide just to make the point that although automation is an important factor in the success of all these businesses, it isn't the main objective for any of them. They each have their own areas of specialization. And furthermore, some of the parts of the automation process are harder to automate than others. And advanced automation of complex tasks requires really deep technical expertise in robotics disciplines like computer vision, motion control, and systems engineering. And the tasks that need automating today need the expertise of companies that specialize in developing advanced robotic solutions from the ground up. So, just getting a little bit deeper into the problem, one of the types of challenges that makes robotics hard is the diversity. And that kind of manifests in multiple dimensions. And despite the commonality that we saw in the videos, there's a lot of diversity that could be more subtle and often very specific to an individual line. So, here's some variability in applications that we might look out for. It's not a comprehensive list, but it includes things like box types and sizes, how box and objects are delivered to the line, the way that objects are packed in boxes, the working footprint, the process flows from one piece of automation to another, incoming regularity of objects, adjacent equipment such as conveyors, software and hardware interfaces to existing automation, and even the level of automation in the factory. So that list kind of goes on, and I wanted to show a quick video of something that comes from our research and development labs, where we're actually testing a real world system, and it shows some of the diversity from the previous slide as part of the testing that we put our robots through. So the system in this video was under development at the time, but it's since been shipped out along with other identical units and deployed to customer sites, and we know these are working reliably out in the world. If you look at what's happening here, there's a number of different types of objects that are traditionally hard for computer vision and perception systems to deal with. So some of these items are transparent, they have high reflectivity. That makes them very difficult for depth cameras to understand, for instance. If you look at the box itself, the box is completely beat up, and we've reused it over multiple testing runs. And these are the types of things that we see in real world conditions, but this actually represents conditions that are worse than what we'd expect in the real world. And this is because we want to identify any failure modes we can before the system ever ships to the customer. We've learned that you can't over prepare for the long tail of edge cases that you might run into in robotics. So, operating under conditions like these is a challenging problem, and dealing with the many variations of product geometries, materials, specularity, and environmental dynamics is where we need to leverage methods like state-of-the-art machine learning in order to complete the tasks. So as a quick summary of our customer introspection, there's a few takeaways that we came up with. One is that the current industrial solutions are built around large CapEx purchases. Our target customers are not robotics experts, and then traditional solutions aren't suited to the variability of conditions and tasks and integrations. So I think the question that we often ask ourselves at Rios is, how do we transform this, which came from that first video? We can see quite a few people, doing repetitive tasks in a semi-structured environment to something like this, where we can fully automate these lines. And one thing I want to clarify is that our goal is not to replace human workers. Our goal is to add value and efficiency to production lines and industrial processes so that businesses can really focus on their core competencies. And what you see, most of the time when you bring in these new methods of automation is that people end up in better jobs that aren't nearly as repetitive. There's an effort to upskill workers, and train them for other things where they can be more effective. So, going back to the CapEx diagram from earlier, I want to look at a couple, bottlenecks that we've seen where we can notice that there are things out of our control when we're trying to sell these products or sell the technology as a product. And so, a few of these at the bottom are capital expenses, the budgets and approvals on the customer side. And there's some things that we could take a larger role in as a company to provide a better customer experience, including things like installation, integration, service, and support. And if we did that, that would create a better experience for the customer. And the other thing to consider here is that, although, we're going to share that ROI ultimately, if we can bring efficiency gains, then we might be able to actually offer a better ROI and make kind of a more profitable business for both of us. So there's a couple categories here that will change on the next slide. And I just wanted to highlight those. When we move into an OpEx or a RaaS model, and RaaS, if you're not familiar with it, is robots as a service, and it's effectively based off of the SaaS model. And this is quite a bit simpler for the customer, and allows us both to focus more on our strengths. And so, a couple things that you might see here is that we've taken over a lot of the installation and integration, and we can offer better support and better service along with that. We also have changed the capital expense to an operating expense, which allows more people to automate. And that ROI gets kind of split up into multiple different factors. So we can actually add value or value-added services around things like data, process optimization, and efficiency gains that weren't possible before, simply because they weren't even being measured. And so this just kind of highlights a couple of the changes. So, the capital expense turns into an operating expense. The budgets that you need to be able to bring in automation decrease, and the amount of approvals you need, because those dollar amounts are lower, goes down. And that ROI gets kind of broken into different categories, and the customer no longer has to deal with installation or integration. And so this is just kind of a quick summary that, based on the previous slide about CapEx limitations, that shows, by providing options for OpEx transactions that are modeled after SaaS, we can resolve a lot of those limitations of the CapEx model and offer a better product overall. And another way to look at this is through the lens of addressable markets. And so, I think most people are familiar with the TAM, the total addressable market. There's another few subcategories one being the serviceable addressable market, which is the portion of market you can acquire based on your business model, and then the serviceable obtainable market, which is a percentage of the serviceable addressable market, which you can realistically capture. And effectively, what we're doing is expanding the amount of customers that we can reach with our technology by innovating on the business model. And so I'm going to get into a few of the implications for AI and ML development based on this new business model and perspective on the industry. So if you look at traditional automation under CapEx models, and look at a few of the limitations there, we have solutions that are application specific and not made to generalize. They provide little or no incentive for updates once they're installed. They're served on device or on site behind firewalls. They're difficult to remotely monitor and debug, and they offer limited or no support. As we move to as a service models such as OpEx or RaaS, we can provide or that the model itself provides incentives for more general solutions from our end because we're servicing multiple customers. It provides incentives for updates such as continued machine learning model development. These models are better served via scalable cloud-based infrastructure. They can be remotely monitored and debugged, and they have support models built into them. And so, this isn't to illustrate selling points, but to actually show how objectives change for machine learning development. Traditional robotics and automation solutions are hardwired for specific tasks, and they're not connected to the outside world because they aren't designed to handle updates. So when we introduce recurring revenue models like RaaS, we need to offer support and upgrades which benefit both Rios and the customer. And we move into a world where industrial automation is connected to the web, and we can deploy robots with the same technologies we build social media platforms on. This really makes robotic platforms more scalable and leverages the same technologies that have made data-driven deep learning models so successful. And there's also there's a side note of a thing that a topic that's kind of popular within machine learning right now in terms of understanding what's happening, which is there's a short paper called the Hardware Lottery that just talks about how repurposing web technologies has described why a lot of the current methodologies are being used, because when they are suited to the available hardware and software, those ideas tend to win in the end. And so one way to look at this is through the lens of advancement in other fields converging and actually giving us the capabilities that we have today. So with that, I just want to get a little bit into what Rios is offering and talk about some of our solutions. So at Rios, we've been developing modular components for both software and hardware that allow us to quickly deploy robots to factory lines. There are a few shown here that each perform a different task, and they can be assembled in an end-to-end solution we call a generalized pack line, or GPL. That GPL itself can be replicated and deployed as well. So some of the components do things like materials or food handling, assembly, pack to box, quality control, and inspection. And you can kind of see here that they each have their own individual functions. This is a representation of how you might assemble these to become a generalized pack line. And you can see that we really offer a complete end-to-end solution for automation. And ultimately, when we put these together, we can fully automate warehouses. And this here is a bit of a nice rendering that shows our vision. But the really cool thing is that these robots exist in the real world, and it's not just conceptual. A lot of the industry is sort of built around this deep tech mindset where people are developing research in labs and it never really makes it into the real world. We're building, designing and iterating on each of these designs and actually testing them out in the field. And they're meeting real world KPIs in some of the most difficult environments you can imagine, as I showed earlier. So these are some images of our robots deployed in the real world, and that's all I have for this presentation. So if you have any questions, I'm welcome to answer anything I can, and you can get more information on what Rios does at Rios.ai, and I also have some of my contact info there as well.
Hey, Matt, thank you so
Hi.
much for that. Sorry for the few little tech issues we were running into. But nonetheless, that was an awesome presentation. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks.
I have a few questions for you, but I don't want to be greedy, and I'm going to let the audience kind of ask questions first. But while we wait for some questions to roll in, where can people connect with you offline?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess any of those links there. So I guess, if you could send me a DM on Twitter, or matt.schaefer@rios.ai is my email.
Awesome. Sounds good. One question that I have while we wait for some of these questions to come in is that I've been asking some of the speakers, mainly just one, since you're the second one. What is one piece of advice you have for founders in 2023 when thinking about some of the topics that you spoke about? I mean, how should they be preparing? How should they be educating themselves? This is a new world, right? So how can founders better prepare for the technology embracement that's coming ahead?
Yeah. Well, I think, from my perspective, it really comes down to that, build, test, design, iterate cycle, where, you have to get products into the real world and you have to test them with customers. If you don't do that, you're really missing a critical piece of feedback that, somebody who spends a lot of their life around machine learning and robots, it seems pretty obvious, but in order to optimize a system, you have to close that loop. So I think, as I mentioned early in the presentation, a lot of these investors are really looking for a path to profitability, and the way to do that is really just through directly engaging with your customers.
I agree. I'm a true believer. I come from a growth marketing background, so it's always about experiment what works, double down on it, what doesn't work, but also, just more importantly, being able to market or measure everything that you market, and having a process that you can streamline, and systemize so you can automate, right? Because I think that's what at least the AI and machine learning proponent of technology right now is helping us accelerate that process versus replacing jobs.
Absolutely. Yeah. That measurement piece of it that you mentioned is critical.
Yeah. Too many times I've been in scenarios where, with early stage startups getting a lot of traction, but they don't know exactly where the traction's coming from. And that's definitely scary long term, but I understand sometimes why it happens in the short term. So doesn't look like we have any questions coming in. So either we can end it right here, or I have one more question for you, if you don't mind me asking.
Sure.
Given that you are, you have a really intriguing position, what is one myth about machine learning, or AI that most people don't know about, or just something that is an uncommon piece of knowledge that you know about that most people don't know about?
Well, I guess I would say, from my perspective, that there's a lot of weight and emphasis put on algorithms as solving problems, and there's no doubt that they're important, but especially when you look at the robotics industry, the things that are advancing the robotics industry are a wide range of different systems working together. And so, a lot of the system advancements, the computational advancements, there's been a lot of hardware that's come out in the last few years that's really enabled machine learning. And I think it's really easy to discount that when you see all of the publicity around algorithms. So I think that would be my maybe that's the thing I think people just overlook. I don't know if it's totally something only I know, but I think the larger community often ignores it.
No, that's really interesting. You said that. I was recently at a networking event here in Dallas that I was hosting, and we teamed up with this like robotics lab, and they have a partnership with is it Boston, MIT? I don't know which university has a big like robotics program.
MIT generally.
MIT.
Yeah.
So yeah, they teamed up with them, and they had these like robotic dogs that were insane. It was like they were so smart. I mean, they're basically going to be utilized to two things. One was to like as a security measure, to replace like security dogs or security guards at night, just because of the accessibility. But two, like in case of like if there was like the example the founder was talking about was like if there's like a chemical fire, like at a chemical plant, they can send the dog in, because usually it takes anywhere from like 20 to 40 minutes, and just thinking, obviously like someone that's always very curious about things, I let my brain start running with that. And I was just like, wow, like the things that this will help solve and the money that it's going to save. It's just, it makes, I think in my unprofessional AI opinion, it's there to eliminate human error, or minimize human error, right? Because that's one of the most valuable things that companies have is human capital. So helping, minimize that so you can increase productivity and revenue and all the other great KPIs that you need to hit.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
I mean, I think those, there's a lot of really interesting work coming out of, like Boston Dynamics and so forth with these robots. And I think the business models for those are still developing. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see, how ubiquitous they become.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what the world looks like in the next 3 to 5 years, I mean, with how fast technology is adapting and evolving. So I'm very excited for it. But I really appreciate you taking the time today to join us, educating us and sharing some insight about some of your work and some of, the things that y'all are working on. So I wish y'all a lot of luck. Best of luck in 2023, much success. And I'll connect with you offline. I think I might have did right before we hopped on. So Matt, any last parting words before I let you go?
No, that's it. It's my pleasure being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Matt. Have a great one.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
What's up, everybody? Well, that was Matt Schaefer. Really excited to introduce our next speaker. We have Dr. Patrick Noonley. He is the CTO of the Blockchain Network.
Blockchain Exchange Network. Yes.
Exchange Network. Thank you. Sorry about that, Dr. Patrick. How's it going today?
Pretty good. Like I said, enjoying the conference.
Where are you calling in from?
San Diego. Actually, I'm stuck at home today, but from San Diego.
Amazing. Bet the weather's nice over there compared to Texas.
Every day. Not to rub it in, but every
yeah,
day.
no. Well, I definitely one of I haven't been, that's the one city in California I'm dying to go to. I've been just about everywhere else for events and whatnot, but San Diego is just one place that I've had high on my bucket list. So hopefully I can check it off this year. But Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about your presentation. You will be speaking about introductions of pervasive AI information. Information. Yeah. So I will let you kind of take the mic from here. If you want to introduce yourself, you have about 40 minutes. If you want to leave the last 5 or 10 minutes, it's been just me and the speaker Q&A. So hopefully the audience is a little bit more awake this time around to join us for some questions at the end. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. What I wanted to talk about today is a technology that we've been working on for gosh, well, it's been a long time, at least 5 years. Um, and we've had some success with it, and we think it actually has a lot of play. And again, this is really just a discussion of kind of the core uh, dynamics that we see within the SaaS and Web3 kind of environment, specifically the need for uh, uh, bioinformatics. And again, I'll talk about what work we've done in it. And again, we're not the only game in town, but in general, think it'll become a big topic here going forward. And again, don't let the title of the company fool you. We're not a crypto play or any of that stuff. Blockchain Exchange Network is a company founded to construct dynamic personal data clouds and to do it in a SaaS format so that people would have uh, a data set that was essentially sticky to them and could be um, guarded, protected, and effectively transportable between entities such as healthcare, automotive, home, all types of basically core applications where they can still maintain their anonymity and privacy, but still maintain the personalization and the other types of things that go with them. So again, we do use blockchain, but we don't use it in a crypto sense. So don't people are always thrown by that name. So let me dispel that kind of from the start here. Here's the baseline of what we're talking about as far as mobile 3, web 3, different variants of software as a service or platform as a service or whatever variant of the as a service variant you want to talk about. We really kind of run into or continue to run into an issue where we needed to actually know exactly who we were talking to. Only because as data became more critical and more sensitive and frankly more intrusive, um, it became evident that we were opening up Pandora's box with regard to um, not just hacking in the traditional sense, but basically being able to tap into people's lives in a more dramatic way. Let's put it that way. What we found was that the current biometrics and the two-factor authentication and all of the biometrics that basically have been applied are great, but frankly, they were just kind of pushing the can down the road a little bit. It wasn't actually a real solution. So we needed a way to enable uh, service providers, network-based service providers, to actually be able to genuinely know who they were talking to and to genuinely understand the people that they were talking to as well. And so what we needed to do was basically find a structure that allowed us to, serve really in a 5G environment, a native always on endpoint user identification. But the problem with security in general is that how to put it, that everyone demands it, but no one wants to pay for it. And if it inconveniences people, they will do their darndest to work around it. And again, I'm probably preaching to the choir. Many of you probably know that, initially we said, hey, look, we're going to use passwords. And of course, everyone used the word password. We said, well, no, you've got to make it more complex. So they added a 1 on the end of password. Great. That wasn't exactly what we were hoping for. Every time we actually put any kind of hurdle in front of folks, they take the easiest way through it and ultimately will actively defeat it. I mean, if you force them to use complex kind of passwords and structures, you'll find post-its all of their compute devices. Two-factor authentication is great, but it too has basically suffered. And I've been told, in several meetings that, well, gosh, the biometrics are going to take care of that. We've got fingerprint, we've got facial recognition. But the reality is that those both take information and really are a convenient way of putting a very large number into your system. So, in other words, rather than typing a long numeric value, this is just a way of automating and resolving it down to a large numeric value. The downside there is, even though it's a little bit harder to hack, once you actually have it, you've compromised the person for good. I mean, you can change your password, but you can't change your fingerprint, and you certainly can't, I mean, not without, you know, movie star plastic surgeons, you're not going to change your face. So in reality, you're actually just putting more risk into the system by using existing biometrics. And that was basically kind of the starting point for the BIN, Blockchain Exchange Network. We needed a way to create a technology that would provide pervasive security, that it would be transparent, that it would apply across the board to all network-borne services, and that it would do it in a way that effectively that was ideally transparent to the user, that the user didn't have to play along with us. And so that's what we've done. It took a lot to do this, by the way. What we did was we started with the actual core tools that we had. And again, I started in AI back in the 1980s before it was popular. It was still pretty niche back then. But again, I was working for General Dynamics, and we were developing, you know, core technologies to identify, you know, bad guys and that type of thing. And of course, we had a lot of compute resource, and we could design custom hardware. The speaker earlier was talking about hardware being the key, and we were having to develop our own chips to do it. But in that work, and then through years following it, it became evident that people are unique, but they have certain commonalities from the standpoint of their own activities. In other words, everyone is different, but everyone is very much themselves, and they represent a pattern. And what we've done is we've actually used a hybrid edge AI data engine that is coupled with a backend server, and we've fused the sensors within current cell phone devices. All of the Apple and Samsung variants, we're still working on Pixel, but and in doing that, what we've done is we've developed a mechanism that allows us to develop a life print, if you will, a fingerprint of a person's activity and characteristics. And we incorporate a lot of things. We incorporate their voice, their walking gait, where they go, continuity in where they go, accelerometers, the gyroscopes, magnetometers even. And in doing that, we have found that we can get a very detailed, we don't need to know who the person is. What we've built is effectively a way of verifying that that person is the same person that we have been patterning through the course of hours, months, years, in some cases. And we've done it with a fair amount of success. We really never need to identify the user themselves. We just need them to be themselves. We just need them to be consistent in their normal day-to-day. And there'll be variations. There will be situations where things will change, and we adapt associated with that. We know that they fall out of their, you know, patterns and systems. And that, of course, is the time that we would be, you know, more inclined to raise our security and our challenge mechanisms if basically we couldn't have a good handle that they are who they say they are. And we've had a fair amount of success with this from the standpoint of we have this running in 6 cities now in northern Arizona. And the system, I think we've got, well, I won't give you a number, but we've got quite a few people on it. And in doing this, we can tell basically when someone hands a phone from one person to another, literally within seconds, simply by the baseline of how the phone is held and a few other metrics associated with it. And we can do it in a low data load kind of way. Now, immediately, I know that everyone's freaking out. They're saying, oh my God, privacy, privacy, privacy. We don't necessarily need to know, again, who the person is. We just need to know whether they are acting like themselves. And so we've gone a long way to make sure that we're not taking the data and just, slamming it all over the place or making it, individually accessible. Instead, we're actually doing a lot of the local work on the edge itself. And again, we can only do some of it, but we can do enough that we can actually pull a lot of the personal information out and the personal characteristics and just deal with the patterning. So we look for continuity in that patterning. And that's really kind of been the secret of how it all, ended up working. Now, what we end up with is kind of a continuously growing list that is user specific. It basically is comprised of, specific authentication points and gateways within those points, classification blocks, and kind of an ongoing breadcrumb of identity, if you will, not breadcrumb of location, but breadcrumb of identity, where we can look for the continuity between the individual components. What's kind of nice about it is that to spoof the system, you actually have to kill off that sounds negative, doesn't it? You have to get in the way of the true person. You have to effectively break that continuity and pull away from that continuity and then force the originator not to be themselves and not to continue. And you've got to basically then be able to replicate their life pattern fairly precisely, just from the standpoint of small characteristics even. We haven't found a way as yet, and again, I'll never say never, but it's very, very, very difficult to trick this system, only because it's not dealing with episodic data. Episodic data is when you fall off the map and you wake up someplace and you log in, or you basically check out of a given program and you pop up on the other side of the country after you've taken a flight. Again, this system, the bioinformatics, actually maintain continuity. They don't have to watch and deal with it all the time, but they know that basically that we have these transition points in gateways. You've gone to an airport. You have, basically woken up at another airport. If we lost continuity with you, you're acting like yourself, but of course you're out of sorts from the standpoint of our probability of identification. But that continuity is what allows us to maintain identity, and we can do it in a very transparent way. Frankly, all of our users, frankly, we get feedback like, is it working? Is it doing anything? Only because they just don't see it operating. They don't see, a little light or a little button or a little something giving them indication that it's working. And in the end, for the most part, we've been able to in-round the need for passwords, in-round the need for, critical personal information data, only because we know exactly who we're talking to. And we know that that's not only their phone, but we know that that's them using their phone. So anyway, I won't go into deep, dark detail, but again, currently we've got the system running in Southern California and Northern Arizona, kind of as our, given test bed. Again, when we're dealing with personal data, we wanted to make sure that we, had our head screwed on straight and we weren't, out there going nuts with regard to all the variants that we could deal with. But It's actually worked out very well, and we've kind of gotten everything kind of broken down. We've gone through situations where indeed we've dealt with people in the fluidity of their day-to-day lives. So we deal with people that go into work every day and they're nice and consistent, and we deal with salespeople who are completely inconsistent and traveling to clients and doing all types of variations in their things, but that becomes part of their pattern. um, in some of our early experiments, I'll even point out that we had one individual. I came into the lab and the guys were all upset. We had one individual where all of his data, his personal patterning had gone off the rails. And of course, we were all wringing our hands saying, oh my gosh, this thing isn't working right. What is so special about this person? And it took us a while to figure it out. It turned out that the fellow had a treatable mental issue. He had stopped taking his medication, and we identified it before his family members realized it, simply by the variation in how he was acting and conducting himself, holding his phone, his walking gait. Things had changed. And frankly, that was the first point that we kind of cracked open the champagne and said, hey, we have something here. So it actually has proven itself from the standpoint of a lot of applications, not just security and authentication, but again, a whole bunch of other applications in general. So we're having some good time working on it. Again, the core technology itself is really intended up front to set aside some of the traditional problems that we've had associated with identifying people and identifying accounts and account usages, and making sure that, again, in a SaaS or a PaaS model, the services are being delivered appropriately and to the right people and at the right time, as well as securing data just in general from the standpoint of the personal information that really kind of is critical to certain delivery models. And in our sense, we just have that continuous stream of data. We don't provide that stream of data, obviously. What we do is we boil it down into the patterning, and we provide our partners with what amounts to be a secure validation that indeed the person is who they say they are. And we do that also on a stream basis so that we maintain contact and no one can jump in the middle. We don't have the whole man in the middle problem. So anyway, we've gotten that sorted. That took a little bit as well. How it's being applied initially, it's being applied as it was originally constructed as a personal protection protocol for personal data clouds. But again, we recognize that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg with regard to the core technology itself. But again, you got to make it work someplace to start with before you propagate it out to everything. So as it stands now, we can provide anonymity and unlock the value of data and remote software delivery from the standpoint of a SaaS model, and provide kind of a protection and monetization to both service providers as well as people, consumers. And we can do that without necessarily having to intrude on their lives. Even though we're looking at patterns, we're breaking those patterns down up front and not conveying the patterns themselves, but just conveying the consistency in the patterns themselves. For our next steps, as far as the bioinformatics, we do have current licensees. We've had some good positive uptake of it all. And again, a lot of this is just fairly recent. But again, I ideally intend to kind of be kind of the core technology behind a lot of future innovation. But we think that it kind of unlocks a bunch of new opportunities within the SaaS environment. Of course, we are. I haven't mentioned it a lot, but we are AI heavy, and we do have a fair amount of compute power behind us. And that has been the key to making this whole thing work. And that's kind of where we're at today. Again, stay tuned. We're still fairly early in the process, but everything's looking really good. I mean, don't want to tempt fate or jinx anything, but we're looking forward to the future. We think we've got a kind of a good outlook going forward. And again, I'll leave you with we had one assessment where we actually had the CEO of Heck Nielsen, FICO, Fair Isaac, take a look at where we're at, and he recognized real quickly that after seeing everything work, that really this kind of changes an awful lot from the standpoint of what we can do and what services we can really deliver going forward. And so we're hopeful kind of that his assessment is the same as ours. So anyway, that's all I had for you today.
There I am. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Patrick. That was awesome. That's really interesting and really unique. That case study in particular, when you were talking about helping solve that issue of the how did you explain it? It kind of going haywire on y'all.
Well, we had freaked out at the time. We weren't sure we were still early on. We had only had about 100 users at the time. It was just like, oh my gosh, why is this thing going off the rails? And it was something that we never expected, that we had that level of understanding. I mean, we knew we were pretty good, but we ended up being better than we thought. The key thing is, though, again, from the standpoint of other folks and their technologies and rollout and all the rest, we are hoping that this kind of core technology really would get people thinking about all the new things that they can do from the standpoint of being able to just our discussion with kind of the telemedicine community. We've become their new best friends, just from the standpoint of the things that we can do. The financial services sector have been enthusiastic as well. And we're hopeful that it'll change kind of the core ideas of what people can do with existing SaaS and with existing Web3 concepts going forward, only because you can genuinely trust who you're talking to.
Yeah, I found it really interesting because I know here in Dallas at one of the universities, I think it was University of Texas Southern, I believe. They have a pretty big mental health school, or just their college of health, but the mental health sector is super big here. And a project they recently launched within the last year was now they have some sort of AI machine learning algorithm that allows them to basically dictate what medication they should put you on based on your personality and other traits, obviously. And it's cut down the amount of prescriptions that a patient needs to utilize before finding the right one, because typically it took anywhere from 3 to 7 times different medications to find the right one for their condition. So I thought that was extremely fascinating, and definitely medicine and health is one of the sectors, in my opinion, that kind of lacks a little bit on innovation and the technology component of it.
Well, what we ended up with was starting out trying to solve an immediate problem we had, which was if we were going to deliver a real data cloud and do it in a really strong way, we needed a different solution at the endpoint. And so we worked on it, we solved that problem, but then it kind of blossomed and pivoted into all these other things that we can do with it. And so, frankly, it's changed a lot of the nature of our company. We basically started out having to take a big step back, saying, wait a minute, we're we're trying to do this one segment when we've basically found kind of the core solution for a whole lot of people's problems. So there's, the business side of the company has been back to the drawing board. You know what I mean?
Constantly evolving.
Absolutely. Pivot.
Yep. So, I want to be courteous of your time. I really appreciate you taking your time. It doesn't look like we have any questions that have come in yet, but I do have, one question for you that I've been kind of asking all the speakers is, what prediction do you have for 2023 in your space? What's one big assumption that you have about the industry and where it's heading and how founders and just companies can better prepare for the technological revolution ahead?
I genuinely think, and again, I obviously I've been doing AI for 40 years now. That's painful to say. I have never entered a year more optimistic that AI and machine learning was going to really change everything. And I think we're actually at that tipping point. And again, everyone's saying that. I realize that. But again, from
From an insider.
from a veteran of the, there's a reason my hair is this color. From a veteran of the industry, yeah, we are, if not this year, next, everything is about to pivot. And everything I see now basically is in a position of being enabled in a different way. It took forever. Between the hardware, between the software, between the focus and concentration, and it took forever. But I think that we're right at that exponential pivot point. And I just can't say enough about the future. I really can't.
That's really interesting because I think you're right. I think the next 12 to 18 months, like everything's going to change from a landscape perspective for companies. But more importantly, I think the people that actually embrace the AI and machine learning and that technology will be able to just kind of exponentially like outpace its competitors, right? Because I think what it's doing, it's helping us become more efficient, avoiding less human error, right? Which will only drive more productivity and revenue at the end of the day. But more importantly, I think it's helping us make smarter, educated decisions.
I think it's doing just that. I think it's changing our decision-making process. It's changing the way we work. It's changing the way we're going to deliver products and the products that we're going to expect to see. And frankly, again, truly everything.
Yep. And, just the one last part that you said, I think while this could be the tipping point, the craziest part is that we barely are even like touching the surface of this. From my little knowledge in AI and in machine learning and just like this type of technology. I mean, like ChatGPT is great and all, but like, that's kind of like the mainstream AI, if you want to call it that,
The ChatGPT has done great things, good things, marvelous things. Wait a few years.
Yeah.
It'll, and again, I'm not taking one thing away from the OpenAI guys, brilliant guys, wonderful guys. Just wait.
Yeah.
Just wait.
No, I'm stoked. Yeah. I've definitely been speaking to other individuals like you in the space that have been there and done that. And yeah, I mean, they're like, this is nothing compared to what you're going to see in the next year or two. Like it's going to be crazy. So I'm looking forward to that. The constant involvement, the iterating, the pivoting, the evolving. It's life of an early stage startup. So thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you for having. No, go ahead. And I was just going to say that I think there will be those that embrace AI and machine learning in their products in the future. And then there are the ones that won't be in business anymore.
And struggle. Yep. So thank you so much, Dr. Patrick. That was awesome. I really appreciate your conversation and the wealth of knowledge that you brought to the table. Where would be the best place for people to connect with you? I'll find Twitter, LinkedIn, email.
LinkedIn is the one that I'm on the most. Yeah.
Sounds good. Cool. I definitely just connected prior to our conversation. So I look forward to seeing you at another event, hopefully. And thanks again for spending your morning with us.
You betcha. Thank you so much.
Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye. What's up, everyone? Well, that was an awesome conversation with Dr. Patrick. I have our last speaker of the day, Florence Hudson. She will be teaching or educating us over learning and leveraging data science and advanced technologies for success. How are you, Florence?
I'm great. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can. Where are you calling in from?
Dynamite. I'm in New York.
New York?
So,
How's the weather up there?
it's winter, you know. So we don't complain about it. It doesn't make anything better. So,
Well,
can you see my screen? Can you see my slides?
I cannot see your slides yet. So while you're pulling those up, I will definitely give a quick little intro about you based on the profile that I have. So you are the executive director at Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub.
Mm-hmm.
Is that New York based?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, it's at Columbia University. But first, I want to make sure the slides are showing. Are they showing now?
Yes, they are.
Okay,
We're good. Awesome. Well, I will hand the mic off to you and let you speak. You have about 40 minutes if you want to leave the last 5 or 10 for Q&A. It's mainly just been me and the speaker Q&A it up at the end, but hopefully the crowd can join us. So thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me and for joining us today. So, as was mentioned, my name is Florence Hudson. I'm the executive director for the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, which is headquartered at Columbia University in New York City in New York in the USA. I don't know where everybody's calling in from. And the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub is funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation, as well as some funding from the U.S. National Institutes of Health. And I'll tell you more about that. I'm also founder and CEO of a consulting firm, a global consulting firm called FD Hint, which stands for Florence D. Hudson International. And I do consulting on advanced technologies and diversity and inclusion. So we're going to be talking about learning and leveraging data science and advanced technologies for success. And I've been working with advanced technologies for many years. A little bit about me. I chair the, but beyond the work I do at Columbia with NSF and NIH, and as founder and CEO of my company, I also chair a standards working group with IEEE. And for those of you who aren't familiar with IEEE, it's the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. And we create a lot of standards, 802.11 for Wi-Fi and all sorts of standards. So I'm working with IEEE and Underwriters Laboratories and chairing a working group on clinical Internet of Things data and device interoperability with TIPS. And TIPS is something I'll talk about today. With the increasing leverage of technology connected to humans these days, not just technology to help and protect enterprises and governments and infrastructure, we need to really focus on trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security of the data, the devices, and the humans. And so we're actually developing a standard on this. I'll be speaking about it at HIMSS for any of you in the healthcare space, which is the Healthcare Information Management System Society, in April in Chicago. If you're there, come by and see us. And we'll be talking about this standard and how important it is in healthcare, but longitudinally in other areas, including smart cities, infrastructure. I recently spoke to NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, about it, about bringing this forward into autonomous vehicles, smart grid, and smart cities. I also work with the National Cancer Institute on their Computational Approaches for Cancer Program Committee, and we basically look at how to use data and high-performance computing and different algorithmic approaches to learn more about cancer and, God willing, stop it and cure it as much as we can. I do a lot of board work, and I'm a former IBM VP and Chief Technology Officer, Chief Innovation Officer, Internet 2, which is a research education network. I was a special advisor for the NS Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, and I worked on cybersecurity research transition to practice. I actually just spoke at an event on that Friday. And I'm an aerospace and mechanical engineer by training, so I worked at NASA at Grumman Aerospace. So I have kind of a varied background, but I've always been at the leading edge of technology. That's what I do, science and technology. And it's really a lot of fun. So let me give you a little bit of a broad range of what we focus on first, then I'll go deeper into some of the focus areas. So the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub was initially funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation in 2015. You can see the grants here, and the way the NSF numbers work is the first two digits are the year that it was awarded. So in 2015, we got our first award. We got one for cybersecurity in 2017, another one for the whole hub in 2019. And then I run the COVID Information Commons as well, which we got awards in 2020 and 2021. And we also work on an NIH program called AIM Ahead, which is artificial intelligence and machine learning to advance health equity and researcher diversity. So we're very focused on, as you can see in our focus areas here, education and data literacy, helping people learn about data science and figure out how to use it. We're very focused in health. You heard us talk about COVID and the cancer work that we're doing, urban to rural communities, and responsible data science, including security, privacy, and ethics. Whatever system you're putting in, whatever SaaS system you're using, whatever data you're using, whatever algorithms, you really have to worry about security of the data, privacy of the information and the human information, and the ethics of how you're doing your work. So as the Northeast Hub, we have these focus areas, and we're all about being a community convener, a collaboration hub, and a catalyst for data science innovation to address these areas. We build a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. It's very central to our work, especially as you look at data science ethics. You need everybody's point of view looking at a problem and deciding how to address it, what data to use, what data not to use, what do your algorithms do, what should they do. This is all very important, and so all of this is very integrated. The hub, since it was born in 2015, so we had 0 people then, has grown to over 7,000 humans, the community, and about 1,300 different organizations in all 50 US states and 48 countries, and we continue to grow. And everybody's welcome to become a member of the hub. You could go to the hub website and sign up for our newsletter and keep involved, listen to our webinars, read our stuff offline, asynchronously. And so what I'm going to talk about today is some of the very important areas that I see in the leverage of advanced technologies for good. And they fall into these 4 focus areas I mentioned. I'm going to talk about our National Student Data Core, which we launched in 2021. And since then, we have actually attracted over 3,400 students from around the world that are leveraging our open online data science education information, as well as educators. We provide a Learner Central for learners to learn data science online asynchronously for free, and actually materials for educators who want to learn how to teach data science. We'll talk about the COVID Information Commons. I'll talk a little bit about a data science resource depository we have, and some of the cybersecurity work that we have going on. So first, what if you wanted to learn data science? Why should you? Well, because everybody should know how to use data for good. They should know what the data is saying and what it's not saying. You can make decisions about your business. You can learn more about your clients. You can learn more about the market. And you can actually help people develop new skills. So we launched this National Student Data Core in 2021 as a community developed initiative. We actually launched it as a Northeast Student Data Core since we're the Northeast Hub. And before long, it was global and across the whole country. So we renamed it to national. And what we do is we provide resources and opportunities for students of all ages. Don't just think, someone in middle school or someone in college. We have people who are serial entrepreneurs who say, I really want to get into this data science thing, and I have to really understand what the data says about my business. And they'll come and ask for a mentor. They'll listen to our data science career panels. They'll get into the mentoring Slack channel. So we help people learn how to use data. We even have moms of middle school students, like 12-year-olds that come and learn about it to get their kids involved in it, and a lot of college students. And we have a special focus on underserved institutions, students, and communities, people that don't have access to data science education, either because they can't afford to go to school right now, their school doesn't have a data science program, whatever it is. But it's really for everybody. So when we first had this idea, we did a call for participation in a founding committee, and we had over 20 people say they wanted to help, to volunteer. And we created these 3 teams: a content and pedagogy team, And we have people in here from academic institutions. We have Princeton, we have University of Scranton, we have Queensborough Community College, which is part of the City University of New York and a minority serving institution. We also have Andrei, who is from IBM, and he runs the IBM Open Data Science for All GitHub site and a lot of that curriculum. So we have all these people helping us create the content and the pedagogical view of how to teach data science. We have students that are creating content. So we have Meghna and Sanket that actually have been working with us, and Benji and Haley and a number of others, and Stephanie, Rahul, Lilybell, all these students that are on the peer instructor and mentoring team, or have been. Some of them have graduated now and they're in real jobs, so to speak. But they actually record videos that are then uploaded to the IBM Open Data Science for All GitHub to teach people more about data science. And they also do mentoring. And then we have an outreach team that helps us with our panels and our webinars and helps us connect to institutions, data, and initiatives that can help us grow data science education. So the NSDC, or National Student Data Corps, enables data science literacy around the world. So you can see we have a rather interesting footprint. We have a number of students and people in Africa, in Europe, in India, in Australia, in South America, North America. I think we just don't have, I think we're still missing Antarctica. And so we provide these free online data science resources. We have a Learner Central, which has data science ethics, including data science comic books, believe it or not. Also links to edX classes, online classes to learn data science ethics. We have a Getting Started area where you can look at Khan Academy material on math and pre-algebra, all the way through introductory to intermediate and intermediate to advanced, including convolutional neural networks, supervised, unsupervised machine learning. And so it's self-paced. People can learn about data science. What is it? We have introductory material, and we have videos that the peer instructor team creates, like 10 to 20-minute videos that doesn't take a lot of your time, but helps you learn more about data science. And they're in our video library. You can see we have Intro to Data Science, very elementary, data acquisition and wrangling, supervised machine learning, all levels. And you can watch these asynchronously in your spare time and learn more about data and data science. We also have Educator Central for people to learn how to teach data science. And we leverage material from Data8 as an example, from Berkeley, Columbia University, University of Rochester, IBM's Open PTech program, MIT's Missing Semester. So we provide this very nice portal to access data science education information. We also have chapters around the world. One of the students at Temple University suggested that he'd like to create a chapter, so we created a chapter system. We have 18 chapters around the world, plus 4 regional ones in the US. We have 6 in India. In the US, we have ones such as at Scripps, Johns Hopkins, George Mason University, Tufts University, a lot of different schools. We have a Career Central where people could look at job websites, data science career resources, including interview guides. And then we have a Volunteer Central for people who would like to volunteer with the National Student Data Corps. We call it our Real Volunteer Program, which stands for Research Experience and Leadership. And as students or humans or any age learn data science, they'd like to try it, do some research, try a project, and we enable that type of opportunity as well. So if anyone's interested in starting or joining an NSDC chapter, the chapters are mostly in higher education institutions. We're open to having them be, professional chapters or in a city or whatever. So if you want to learn more about that, you can just go to anybigdatahub.org/NSDC and learn more about that. We also have collaborations with a lot of different organizations. I was mentioning we partner with IBM and their Open Data Science for All project and program. We leverage all their content in GitHub and then have students record some of the PowerPoints into videos and make those available through IBM and through our own website. We also partner with another organization that I'm on the editorial board for, Blockchain and Healthcare Today and Telehealth and Medicine Today. And we've launched a call for manuscripts with them. And for people who are academic, student, and research members of the Hub or the National Student Data Corps, you have the opportunity to submit a research manuscript with the article processing charge waived. Industry players can't participate in that. They would pay the article processing charge as you usually do to submit to a journal. And the manuscripts we're looking for would be to address the leverage of data science tools and techniques, or blockchain and distributed ledger technologies for healthcare. And so this call for manuscripts is open through December 2023, and we're open to other journals that might like to do a call for manuscripts with us as well. We also have a data science resource repository, which you could go to at anybigdatahub.org/DSRR for data science resource repository. And it's a curated set of over 600 resources for learners, educators, researchers, career explorers. You can find books, you can find networks, you can find classes, you can find articles, you can find all sorts of stuff in here. And we're building the Spanish language resources, a pretty fair part of our community at the Hub and the National Student Data Corps are either from Spanish-speaking countries, at Hispanic-serving institutions, or related, some type of a Latino background, and they speak Spanish. And so what we're looking to do is provide these resources in English and Spanish. And we actually have a student on our team that we pay who is bilingual English and Spanish. She's a Columbia University student, and she's helping us build up the Spanish resources. If you know of any, please send us an email. We love to work with researchers, professionals, industry professionals, nonprofit. We are a collaboration hub. We help enable public-private collaborations. And what we've been really building with our National Student Data Corps is a large student population that we work with and help them do research and learn data science. So we're having our inaugural Northeast Big Data Hub Student Research Symposium, where the students are the ones presenting, not people like me on this session, but the students. And so we've had multiple challenges for the students to do. We had a data science symposium. We had a COVID Information Commons student paper challenge and a cybersecurity risk conference that we did with students. And the winners are going to be presenting on January 27th, all undergraduate and graduate students that will be presenting their research. And I've done a lot of presenting in my life, and I have to tell you, I've looked at their presentations and they are really good, very impressive. So if you would like to join us, please do. All of what we do is open and free. So that's a lot about what we do about enabling data science awareness, providing data science online free education, mentoring, panels that people can listen to, data science career panels. Now I'll talk a little bit about the health focus area. And as you're probably aware, well, everyone's aware that we've had this COVID pandemic, and it's still here, and so COVID is probably going to be something we have with us in our lifetimes, if not beyond our lifetimes. And so there's still a lot of learning to be done about how we mitigate the impacts that it's having on education, on society, and on social determinants of health, on how we keep people safer longer term as new pandemics come forward. What do we do? And so through our COVID Information Commons, we bring together researchers, students, professionals to talk about the research that's being done, that's been funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health. We have over 9,000 COVID-related research awards in the database, and you can view any of them. We also work closely with IEEE, as I mentioned, the Institute for Electronic Engineers. We hosted a Global Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity virtual workshop series 2 years ago now, and we continue our collaboration on that. And I'll talk more about that. We also work with researchers that help us look at how to leverage data and data science for health. So there was a project done by Chirag Patel, who's at Harvard, the Exposome Data Warehouse, Tools and Big Data for Mapping Environmental and Disease Disparities. It's been around for a couple of years, and that actually has resulted in a startup called XY.ai. So we nurtured the research and the transition to practice of the research, working with the different organizations and researchers. And we also work in quantum technology and quantum computing. I hosted with Blockchain and Healthcare Today and Telehealth and Medicine Today, a fireside chat with one of the researchers that I know who's funded by the National Science Foundation in cybersecurity on quantum technology and techniques for cybersecurity threat in healthcare, which is open online and available on the Blockchain and Healthcare Today website. So what we really do is look at how you learn and leverage advanced technologies to help in these health focus areas. Regarding health and AI and machine learning, there's a lot of focus on how you use it for good, how AI and ML may be misused either on purpose or not on purpose, as you're looking to provide better care. And so there's a big and increasing focus on all of that. A little more about some of these initiatives. The COVID Information Commons was initially funded in May of 2020. They called us in March of 2020, which was when the world closed down, as you may recall, and asked us if we could create an open portal that could help people easily find National Science Foundation funded research related to COVID. At the time, I went into the NSF website. There were 32 research awards. I was like, oh, I could do this on my laptop. Fast forward, there are over 9,000 now from NSF and NIH. So we got our initial award to create this database and portal, which became a collaborative and dynamic community. And then they gave us $2 million more in 2021 to extend this COVID Info Commons extension when we expanded beyond the initial 700, then 1,000 NSF awards to add the NIH awards and all the new awards. And we have a community of over 2,500 people from 650 organizations. We communicate with monthly. We do lightning talk webinars. We have those lightning talks on our portal on the website, and we provide English and Spanish transcripts from an accessibility perspective. So for the hard of hearing, they could read the English transcript, and for people who speak Spanish, they can read it in Spanish. We have links to global resources, data sets, groups, guides. And we have the principal investigator or the researchers provide information on their research results, collaboration opportunities, ORCID, which is an ID that you can use. Some of you may have ORCID IDs. You can get them for free, where people can look at your publications, your educational and professional experience that you populate yourself. So we provide all these ways for people to find each other and find information. Here's a sample of the English and Spanish transcripts that we have. Nora Garza and Gabby, PI and co-PI on a RAPID grant, which is a rapid response grant that NSF gave out. Rapid in, they say, write a proposal and they give you the money very quickly because we were in a pandemic. It was an emergency. And so this was one of the rapids using real life COVID-19 data and quantitative reasoning skills for undergraduate Hispanic STEM students. Very interesting. So we actually have students that help us do these translations into Spanish, which is very valuable. Here's a little more. I was talking about quantum technologies for cybersecurity. In this case, it's in healthcare. And Shantanu Chakraborty, who is a researcher and professor at Washington University in St. Louis. We did this video together, and it's available on YouTube, as you can see here. And it helps us think about learning and preparing for breaches with a preemptive stance and not just when there's an imminent threat, leveraging quantum. Like any technology, quantum could be used for good or for bad. So it's best to protect yourself and plan ahead so that you can make sure it's being used for good and you're not exposed due to it. Some of the other information, once again, you can leverage asynchronously at this point, was the Connected Healthcare Cybersecurity Workshop series we did with IEEE a couple of years ago. And you can look at all of this online. We have students that wrote breakout summaries. We have online videos. You can see it included global connected healthcare, cybersecurity risks and a roadmap, privacy, ethics, and trust in connected healthcare, as we've been talking about ethics and data and device identity, validation, interoperability, integrated systems and connected healthcare, and cybersecurity technology and policy, because you may have some technology needs. The question is the policy supporting that, and which is going faster. So as you could tell, even though I'm an aerospace engineer, a lot of us have gone into healthcare because there's a lot of opportunity to use data. And as aerospace engineers, it was all about the data. And so a lot of us are going into this space. And one of the areas that I'm focused on is connected healthcare, data and device interoperability, which can enable precision healthcare, where they use more information about you, your environment, your family history. And here you could see, connected healthcare devices and data, your IoT devices, whether it's your Apple Watch or your implanted defibrillator, clinical care data provided by your provider or by those devices, environmental data, are there issues with, ppm? Is there a lot of particles in the air and your asthma is, getting worse? Has it gotten worse since you've moved to this certain area with a lot of dust or a lot of sand? Patient lifestyle data and research data. And all of this data can be leveraged to improve insights and potentially outcomes in healthcare. And these advanced technologies are enabling this digital transformation, but they can also increase risk. So IoT, or Internet of Things, blockchain, machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality, some other reality, and little data that becomes big data. So all of this can help, but there's risk. So that's the thing that you always have to think about as you deploy a new technology, whether it's a new software system or a new piece of hardware. What's it connected to? What could possibly go wrong? And being an aerospace engineer, we think about that a lot. There have been some terrible things that have happened when devices don't work well up in space. There's not much you can do. There isn't someone to come and maintain it for you. You have to be prepared to handle it. And on these healthcare devices, we really need to protect the humans. So when you look at what could possibly go wrong, insulin pumps can be hacked. This is a friend of mine, Jay Radcliffe, who famously hacked his own insulin pump. He's a cybersecurity researcher. And not just a researcher. He works in, medical device companies. Pacemakers can be hacked. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, recalled 465,000 pacemakers due to hacking fears. And they could be exploited with adjacent access at a low skill level. Adjacent access is within 50 feet or, 10 to 15 meters. A lot of people are within that, that space. If you're on a plane, if you're at a movie, if you're on the street, anywhere. So there's a lot of risk that needs to be considered. So always look at what your risk could be and your risk mitigation plan. So from the healthcare perspective, we must secure connected healthcare devices and data. And enable interoperability while we're protecting devices, data, and humans. So my top concerns, having been in cybersecurity for many years, I first worked with Department of Defense projects when I started as an aerospace engineer at Grumman and U.S. Navy aircraft and space systems as well. But now what we want to do is look at the humans, and it always comes down to the humans. So my top concerns are connected healthcare devices and data. If they're hacked, they could quickly kill somebody. Connected hospitals, campuses, cities, and vehicles. That could be very dangerous as well. And clinical, scientific, and research device and data integrity. You may have heard or remember that there was a university research facility toward the beginning of the COVID pandemic and the research that they were doing, and somebody hacked into their system and changed the data. That could be very bad because then you're making decisions on poor data. So we need protection regarding the devices, the hardware, the software, and the services. We need to protect, to work on improving the risk from physical health and safety risks, financial risk, reputational harm. We need to combat data theft, improve data integrity, and limit the loss of privacy. And we need to have a defense in-depth strategy. For those of you who are technologists, you think of it as the hardware, the firmware, the software, and the service level. And we need to evolve our policy and culture to expect this extra level of TIPS, we call it, trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. And as you can see, I've been focused on this for quite a number of years. In 2015, I talked about this in a KPMG article saying they're going to try to hack everything. And I'm most worried about security in healthcare, in cars and moving vehicles, and critical infrastructure. And we need to think about it right from the beginning when you're developing or designing or deploying a system, and continuously monitor it and stay ahead of the threat. So we created this TIPS model. I consider it the new cybersecurity paradigm: trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. We're first deploying it in connected healthcare from a standards, as we work on a standard perspective, and then beyond. I've already spoken to the National Institute of Standards and Technology about, grounding it in the healthcare side, and then taking it more broadly through autonomous vehicles, transportation systems, smart grid, infrastructure, areas where we really have to stay on top of the threats and reduce the risk. Trust is about only allowing designated people or services to have device or data access. Identity is validating the identity of the people, services, and things who are trying to get into the system to see if you can trust them, and you don't let them in if you can't. Privacy is ensuring device, personal, and sensitive data is kept private. Protection is to protect the devices and the users from harm, physical, digital, financial, and reputational harm. Safety for devices, infrastructure, and people, and maintaining security of data, devices, and people. So there's a lot to do here. This will be a problem probably forever, and so we need to make sure we're addressing it. So I've been working with a number of organizations, especially IEEE, to enable more awareness about the need for trust and security and interoperability. These are a couple of articles that we published in 2018 together, enabling trust and security tips for IoT and wearables and medical interoperability, the evolving frontier. And we continue to work on it. From that, we had a pre-standards effort where we developed this TIPS framework for clinical IoT data and device interoperability. And this is meant as just a framework. This isn't the answer, but these are all the things you have to think about, or most of them. So you have to think about the user experience and the user interface, whether it's a patient, a provider, like a doctor, payers, regulators, pharma, the devices. There's a user interface for devices too, device to device, and research. The applications themselves, whether it's precision medicine or other health apps, real-time medical device actuation, the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in applications and advanced analytics, integration models, including other standards. As they say, the beauty about standards is there are so many of them, but these are some of the standards used in healthcare: FHIR, HL7, JELO, SNOMED, LOINC, ISO 11073, and others, and there could be more. And then application programming interfaces and software development kits, as well as other technologies, distributed ledger technologies. A lot of people think of it as blockchain, but there are other DLTs, the connection layers, the data ingest and management, and different data sources and targets, which are just growing all the time. And on the right here, up and down in the green, if you can see the green, is where we look at the TIPS elements: security, encryption, federated identity management, key management, user management, authentication, privacy, compliance, governance for hardware, software, service, applications, and services. So I would say any SaaS system you put in place, I would suggest you have a chief technology officer or CIO who's worrying about this for you, and then see what you need to do to keep things safe and mitigate risk to your clients, your shareholders, everybody. So we then developed this standards working group, which I chair with IEEE and Underwriters Laboratory. And we have over 250 people in it from 22 countries and 6 continents. It includes device manufacturers, technologists, the National Institutes of Health, providers, payers, patient advocates, regulators, pharmaceutical companies, electronic medical record and electronic health record vendors, researchers, academics, startups, whole bunches of people. And we have these 7 subgroups, and together we're building this standard. So we've also been doing publications on this to increase awareness for the need of TIPS. And so these are 2 books that I'm editor-in-chief for, published with Springer. Women Securing the Future with Tips for Connected Healthcare just came out in June of 2022, and Women Securing the Future with Tips for IoT. In each of these, I have 17 other women authors. It's in the Women in Engineering and Science series, and everything from lawyers, judges, technologists, encryption experts, all sorts of people that can help you understand the need for tips for IoT and connected healthcare. We also increasing awareness on the need for responsible data science, including security and privacy, as we discussed, in ethics. One of our collaborators, who's on the advisory board at the Northeast Big Data Hub, Julia Stojanovic, is a professor at NYU, New York University, in New York City, in New York, in the USA. And she has actually published a number of comic books. And they're not like Disney comic books. They're really about artificial intelligence and machine learning. So it uses a comic book type of theme, but it actually delivers real information about AI, bias, ethics. They're available in multiple languages: English, Spanish, Portuguese, and a couple of other languages. You can see here Fairness and Friends, all about that bias and who lives, who dies, who decides. Very interesting. These are real topics in responsible data science. So at the Northeast Big Data Hub and the programs we run, including the COVID Information Commons, the National Student Data Corps, our cybersecurity risk conferences, where we're also very focused on the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. I recently spoke on a World Information Transfer webinar. They work closely with the UN. And so these are some of the goals we have for the planet, that the UN has helped us think about for a number of years now, from good health and well-being to quality education, gender equality, clean water, responsible consumption, sustainable cities, economic development, climate action, and then partnerships to get toward the goal. So we're focused on all of these areas, and we're delighted to be able to bring this to everybody around the planet who wants to participate. And if you'd like, feel free to sign up for the Northeast Big Data Hub mailings, join the COVID Information Commons community, the National Student Data Corps, use our online asynchronous resources, share them with your friends, your children, your grandchildren, your parents, colleagues, and join our events. You can be a volunteer if you want with the Hub and have a great impact. If you are a data science person or want to be one, you can sign up to be a mentor for the National Student Data Corps or a mentee if you want somebody to mentor you, and reach out to us anytime if we can help. So that's what I wanted to share today. It was kind of a broad swath, but this was really a view of how you can learn about some of these advanced technologies and then how you can use them for good. So that's what I wanted to share with you all today, and I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much for that, Florence. That was awesome. That was a lot of great information, and man, you are a busy person.
I am.
So I will leave the floor open for the next 5 or 10 minutes. While we wait for some questions to come in, let me ask you, where can people connect with you, or what platforms do you prefer for people to connect
LinkedIn
you?
is the best place. They can follow me on Twitter. I'm easy to find. Florence Hudson. Not too many of us. And LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Okay, great. So one question I've been asking all the speakers is, what are your predictions for 2023 in your space?
Gosh, I have so many spaces. So the leverage of artificial intelligence and machine learning is really increasing. The risk associated with it is increasing because it's being used more and more. And this is an example of a technology that, just maybe 5 or 10 years ago, some people were saying, oh, it's never going to take off, that AI stuff. We've been talking about it since the 1950s. I'm like, yeah, well, guess what? It's here. It's in your phone.
50 years.
Yeah, right. And so we're at this stage now where technologies that we didn't think were real are real. And so what we're going to see is the use of them, but also the need for a risk mitigation strategy of how they're being used. So I think that's going to become more and more important at the board level, at the technology level, at the city level, at the human level. So I think that will be happening more and more, whether it's all the technologies I talked about, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, virtual reality, extended reality. Nobody wants the current reality, so let me find a new one, right? As well as, big data and things like that. So I think there's going to be more opportunity to learn about them, to have a career related to those. So there are new opportunities for people who want to retool themselves for data science. I had, there was one gentleman who's getting his MBA at Southern University in the US, who's a serial entrepreneur. He's been in business probably 15, 20 years. And he said, I want to retool myself for data science, but I'm not technical. I said, okay, well, go into data visualization, because as a business leader, he's been a CEO. I said, what the data is telling you, and you have an instinct about that. So you can work on that side of it, hire someone that can manage and analyze the data for you, but you'll have an instinct, a spidey sense, so to speak, on what's right or what's wrong. And so there's an opportunity to retool yourself and learn and get into these new markets. I think that's going to be happening. And many other things, as we know. I think I was really heartened. I was mentioning that I'll be speaking in April in Chicago at the HIMSS conference, which is the Healthcare Information Management System Society. During COVID, they had 20,000 people come to their conference. When it's not COVID, they usually have 40 or 50,000 people. Wow. Yeah, and it's health information management. So it's doctors, it's IT people, it's security people, it's all sorts of people. So I was very heartened. We were very happy that they asked us to present about our standard on clinical IoT and tips. But I was looking through all the other presentations, so many great presentations about leverage of quantum and AI and ML, all of these technologies that really have a foothold now. even though they're old, they're not really mature yet.
Yep.
Even though they may be 72, if they started in 1950, let's say, they're not really mature yet, and the environment is changing. There's a lot more data now.
Yep.
Back then when we were doing AI, it was data in an enterprise, in a government, in an industry, it was like behind a firewall. Now it's data all over the place, right? There's social
Yep.
media data, there's IoT data, there's Twitter data, there's fake data, all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot to worry about, but there's
Mhm.
even more of an opportunity to deploy these new technologies. So I think we're going to see that increasing.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I definitely think a lot of my family works in the healthcare space, and I'm like the only entrepreneurial person, I guess, that came out of our family, you can say, besides my dad. But one thing that's really interesting, because I'm always posing, I'm always talking about the different startups I'm working with. I run an accelerator here in Dallas, so I get to see and then interact with amazing people like yourself. So like technology is moving so fast, but I feel like the healthcare industry and even like the auto industry and insurance industry, they're so far behind. So one thing that through my experience with working with like ChatGPT and some of these other AI tools, is that like you can almost get yourself into like a information overload, because like, yes, it's very accessible and you can get information, but then like you almost get hit with a plethora of information, then you don't even know how to consume it. So like having some sort of like filtering warehouse system per se, and that's something I really focus in the early stage startup space, and letting, founders that I advise or just companies that I'm working with, like creating these processes, right? Because at scale, what you're doing with 10 customers or 100 customers is not the same that you can do with 1,000, 100,000, even 1 million customers. So do you see some sort of like regulation that might come in with all this technology within, like specifically within the healthcare and information management system, just because of all like the HIPAA and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I don't know if you saw recently that the Pope actually, as in Rome, like the Pope of the Catholic Church, actually brought together leaders regarding AI and data ethics. That was just last week. I know Dario Gil, who I used to work with when I was at IBM, he leads research now, and he's in the picture with the Pope, where they were talking about AI and ML and the ethics, the human ethics related to it. So there's more of a focus on it. The EU has always been ahead on this, with GDPR as an example,
Mhm.
the privacy regulations. We're building this TIP standard as an international standard for trust, identity, privacy, protection, safety, and security. Each country gets to regulate what they want to, but we're looking to build a technical standard so people can improve TIPs to make it safer for the data, the devices, and the humans. And that's why we also had a technology and policy discussion in that IEEE workshop series I mentioned. You have to look at the technology and the policy. Policymakers get to make their own policy, and there isn't really a global policy regulator at this point. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe, as we go intergalactic, maybe they'll decide the Earth is small enough that it can have a policy regulator. But I think there's more interest in looking at what needs to be done. If you want to look at LinkedIn, Dario Gil actually wrote about his time with the Pope and the discussions that they had and what's going on
Nice.
about AI and ML and ethics. I know that a few years ago, I went to Princeton undergraduate, and Sonia Sotomayor also did. She's a Supreme Court justice in the US. And so we were at an event together at Princeton, and I asked her, what do you think with all this new technology and Internet of Things and all this stuff? What do you think about the security and privacy issues? And I told her, I'm working on security. And she said, well, I'm glad you're working on security because I'm working on privacy, because I don't think our citizens realize the human rights they're giving up when they
Yeah.
use these technologies. So there's a lot of interest in it. She's written some, opinions on it, as a Supreme Court justice in the US. There are lawyers involved in this. There's a chief privacy officer role. There's chief information security officer role. So there's more interest in it, but every country gets to regulate as they wish. As you know, there are some countries where you can't use Google Docs. You can't, everyone gets to, as I say, your country, your rules, but there is more need to focus on it. And so I'm heartened, as I said, that I see a lot more evidence that people are looking at quantum and AI and ML and security and privacy. And when we talk about this TIP standard, people who understand the problem, they have like laser beam eyes, like, we really need that. We're glad you're doing it. I'm like, oh, I agree with you. We really need it. And we specifically branded it, even though I worked with a guy with IEEE to kind of create it. We branded it IEEE so it couldn't be like one company could say, this is mine. I'm like, no, everybody gets to do this. So this is a global standard.
Amazing.
That's the goal here. And everybody, it's a Rosetta Stone. Everybody gets to touch it. And
almost
then
like an association type.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. It's like a technical community that supports, the needs of the humans and the manufacturers and the devices, so that we also plan to teach people about TIPS. What I usually tell the working group that we're working on with TIPS, I say, my vision is that once we get, God willing, the standard out the door, is that so 3 to 5 years from now, when it's in the devices and the data and the providers and the doctors and the students and everyone knows about it, we teach them that there'll be some little girl at the doctor, and the doctor is going to try to give her an insulin pump, and she's going to look up at him and say, does it have TIPS? So we want to create demand for it too, because I often tell the story, I'm a geek, right? So I knew I wanted to be an aerospace engineer when I was 3, long story. But when I was little, I would look for the UL sticker on the electric cords, the Underwriters Laboratory sticker.
Interesting.
The tag, because I knew that meant it was safer.
Wow.
And so then what I want to teach people is, if it has a tip something or other, that it's safer. Because just like anywhere, when you go into a city or an area, like, walk down this street, don't walk down that street. You have to self-regulate and protect yourself. And so if you know what to ask for, then it can help protect you too. So that's our goal, is to try to keep the humans alive and safe.
That's amazing. And I definitely, any way that I can be of a resource and champion what y'all are doing, it's amazing. I think it's very much overdue and needed. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us and all your insight, all the amazing information. It's been an absolute pleasure. I want to be courteous of your time. So any last parting words before I let you go?
No, I hope this was valuable for some of you. If you want to connect, feel free to connect on LinkedIn. If you want to join the Northeast Big Data Hub, everybody's welcome. Just go to our website, and good luck. And
awesome. Thank you very much, Florence. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye, everybody.
Awesome. Well, that concludes today. We will be ending the event for the day. So thank you so much for everyone that joined us. I will be back tomorrow morning at 7:55 a.m. Texas time, which is 8:55 Eastern and 6:55 Pacific Standard Time. So thank you so much for everyone that joined us today. To Andrei and his team, thank you for another great day, and all the amazing speakers. Really excited to see the speakers tomorrow, which we will be having 5 more speakers join us tomorrow, and it should be a lot of fun. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Enjoy your afternoon.